Okay, Chair Tatine, we are recording and broadcasting. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June 24, 2021 Delta Stewardship Council meeting. I'm Susan Tatine, Chair of the Council. We have a packed agenda today, so let's go ahead and get started with establishing a quorum. We'll start with Judge Damrell.
Damrell here.
And Virginia.
Virginia here.
Maria Moranian.
Moranian here.
And Don.
Natoli here.
Christy
Smith here.
And Daniel.
Neil Zingali here. Good morning.
And Susan Tatayan here. We have a quorum. If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment, please send an email blue card to the clerk at engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov as seen on the screen. Be sure to note your name and the agenda item you wish to comment on. Also, please note if you wish to speak or would like the clerk to read your comment for you. And when called upon, the clerk will unmute you or read your comment if requested. So on to agenda item 3, the consent calendar. This is an action item. One item on the consent calendar today is adoption of the May 21 to 2022 meeting summary. Are there any public comments on this item?
There are not.
Great, thank you, Beck. Members, is there any discussion necessary? Okay. Okay, a motion to adopt the
Second to adopt.
Okay, so Judge Damrell has motioned to accept the consent calendar, second by Daniel Zingali. Any objection to adopting the consent calendar? Okay, hearing none, the consent calendar is unanimously adopted. Moving on to agenda item 4, the chair's report. For the chair's report, I wanted to share with you that the next Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting will be held virtually on July 12th, starting at 1 o'clock. And I'm very excited that we're going to have a robust panel discussion about ecosystem-based management during drought. And the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Chuck Bonham, has agreed to moderate the panel. And panel members include the Deputy Director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Chad Dibble, and he'll share some lessons learned during the last drought. Our Delta Water Master, Michael George, will be talking about voluntary curtailments. And Department of Water Resources scientist Rosemary Hartman will share highlights of data synthesis that was completed to test hypotheses about the viability of fish species during droughts. So I'm anticipating that this will be a very engaging educational panel. We'll also have a series of science updates, one from our lead scientist, Dr. Laurel Larson. We'll also talk about the science action agenda, social science efforts in the Delta, and the 2019 to 2020 Delta crosscut budget, and a very short update on the science needs assessment progress. So is there any public comment on agenda item 4?
There is not.
Okay. Any questions for me?
The July 11th meeting, I'm sorry, I missed the time.
Oh, July 12th at 1 o'clock.
Right. Great.
Okay, then let's move on to agenda item 5, public comment on any topic not on the agenda?
We have Lisa Thompson.
Okay. Is she muted?
I think we are getting her on now. It's
Okay.
just
Hi,
one.
good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Good morning, Chair Tatayan and council members. My name is Dr. Lisa Thompson, and I'm the Chief Scientist for Regional SAN, the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District. We serve about 1.6 million people in the Sacramento region, and we discharge the majority of our treated wastewater to the Sacramento River, with the remainder used in recycled water projects. We take our role as environmental stewards very seriously, and we have a keen interest in the health of the Delta ecosystem and in the availability of relevant, unbiased science to assist the Delta community in managing and improving the environment. I appreciate the opportunity to provide you with Regional SAN's comments regarding the funding of the Delta Independent Science Board, or ISB. Before I begin, in the interest of full disclosure, I should mention that Dr. Robert Nyman, who's a new member of the ISB, was my postdoctoral supervisor. Regional SAN has been closely following the activities of the ISB for over 7 years, and we have a staff scientist who regularly attends ISB meetings. We have participated in ISB activities through surveys, interviews, workshops, and providing comments on ISB documents that are made available for public review. We have greatly appreciated the role that the ISB has played in improving the quality of Delta science, and there are 3 main reasons for this. First, the ISB's activities support putting the One Delta, One Science concept into action. The ISB makes a real effort to consult with a wide range of stakeholders on the scientific needs of managers when designing and conducting its reviews. Most of the ISB members are not part of the Delta community, but they put a lot of effort into becoming knowledgeable about the current state of Delta research, studies, and management. They also bring extraordinary levels of expertise and experience gained in a wide range of ecosystems and scientific disciplines. Secondly, the ISB improves future scientific efforts by providing an unbiased reality check on the current state of the science and encouraging new work to fill in the gaps it has identified in its reviews. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the activities of the ISB improve the tone and quality of science in the Delta. Just knowing that the ISB will be reviewing the scientific topics of its choice encourages people to make management arguments and decisions based on the best available science, not just the most convenient or most popular science of the day. The ISB should be funded in a manner commensurate with its important role in the Delta, and the members of the ISB deserve to be compensated for their time, effort, and enthusiasm in keeping with their level of expertise. We encourage the Delta Stewardship Council to make every possible effort to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. Too much hangs in the balance in terms of issues like climate change, water and land management, and native and non-native species management for the quality of Delta science to backslide now. Thank you very much for all the work that you do for the Delta, for your attention today, and for any efforts you're able to make to ensure the adequate funding of the ISB.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you for your very cogent comments. Any other comments, Beck?
We also have Deidre Desjardins
Okay.
joining us for this comment period.
Thank you. Good afternoon, or good morning, Chair Tatayan and council members. I also wish to speak about the Delta Independent Science Board. I wanted to plead on their behalf for more interim support. It's almost a year now since their compensation was cut, and the $100 per diem is not a model where the board members do the work, and they're struggling to complete 2 reviews. The monitoring enterprise review is the largest review the board has ever done, And I know that the board, the staff that are assigned are working on it, but I think you really need to look at, they basically lost 2.5 FTEs of senior, very senior scientists with an extraordinary range of expertise, and they really need additional staff. In March, the chair, Stephen Brandt, asked Susan and the DSC leadership if they could bring back if they could get assistance from some of the outgoing members and pay them by contract to help finish the review. And he said he didn't think it was possible because of contracting law, but we've looked and they've extended, the Delta Stewardship Council has extended the mercury control program contracts for those independent scientists. And you've also executed a 2-year contract for climate change work team leadership. So it should at least be possible to bring back scientists under contract. If there's some reason you don't feel it's appropriate to bring back a former member just to assist with finishing a review, then at least consider finding some other scientists under contract. Because right now, although they're getting 2 postdocs, they won't start till 2022. So those are not interim staff. They're future staff, and they won't be provided until they just won't be provided in time. So thank you, and please do consider this staffing issue. It's critically important for the board to be able to carry out their mission, and they've been working under just way too difficult circumstances. Thank you again.
Great, thank you, Deirdre. Any other public comments?
That's it.
Thanks, Beck. Let's move on to agenda item 6, the executive officer's report with Jessica Pearson.
Chair Tatayan, before we do that, may I briefly respond to the last 2 folks from the public?
Oh, certainly.
I just wanted to restate that, speaking for myself, that in every conversation I've had with staff and everyone at the council, I want to just reiterate that we appreciate the urgency, the critical role of the Independent Science Board, and the urgency of this issue. And I am really confident that everything is being done that is appropriate to us, or that we're able to do, to address this. And we obviously have a keen eye on the legislature and their role in this. So just wanted to thank folks for speaking up and offer some reassurance that we get it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Any other comments from any other council members?
Yes, I have one. I was just wondering, and I know our efforts about this, but then is there anywhere that we could go on the record loud and clear that we all are for this as the council? Or have we already done it? Or is there a mode of communication, a vehicle that we can do that through that?
Well, at this time, the legislative staff and lead staff of the legislature are asking questions. They're interacting with Ryan Stanbra and Jessica Pearson, and I'm anticipating that our interactions answering their questions will be useful in getting productive legislative language. So yes, we have a vehicle.
Right. Because, you know, we hear all the public comments, and everybody should know that more than anybody, it's us that really are in need of this info, and to do the right thing, to make the right decision. So I just, and you answered my question. I just want to make sure that we are loud and clear that we're for it.
Yes, yes, Maria. It's, I think that everyone appreciates that this council deeply values the Delta Independent Science Board. And yeah, any vehicle that will help address these compensation and employment structure issues, we are definitely in support of.
Great, thank you.
Well, if there are no other public comments, Jessica Pearson, are we ready for the executive officer's report?
Thank you, Chair Tatayan. Good morning, members and members of the public. As a reminder, staff continue to work remotely and we are available to assist the public. Our public meeting formats continue to be fully remote, compliant with state guidance. But to contact staff at the council at any time, you're encouraged to email hello@deltacouncil.ca.gov to be directed to the appropriate person. This past Monday, June 21st, the council took an important step in the development of an environmental justice issue paper by convening an introductory meeting of an environmental justice advisory group made up of individuals and organizations representing environmental justice communities, indigenous perspectives, individuals experiencing homelessness, subsistence fishers, and others with expertise related to environmental justice and Delta management. The hope is that this group can help the council gain an understanding of how these communities would like to engage with the council and to help us develop a research approach for the issue paper. If anyone is interested in providing thoughts or insights into these perspectives, please contact environmental justice at deltacouncil.ca.gov. I know that Councilmember Madueño was present at Monday's event, so I don't know, Councilmember Madueño, if you have any comments that you want to add or any observations from the evening.
Thank you, Jessica. No, I just want to reiterate what I shared with you and the staff. I think that this is a really great effort that is being taken on. We heard I think some very interesting and very productive comments from some of those that have been asked to participate. But the most important thing that I took away is that this is necessary and it's needed, especially for us as council members and our efforts moving forward. And I apologize for that. But we definitely, I think, are going to benefit greatly from this paper and from those who are, or who have been asked and who have decided to be a part of this. I think it's going to be a great endeavor for all of us. So thank you.
Great, thank you. On the topic of covered action certifications, I have a few updates. First, Reclamation District 3 submitted a certification of consistency for the Grand Island Levee Seepage Cutoff Wall project. The project's public review and appeal period closed on May 26th. In addition, the City of Fairfield submitted a certification of consistency for the Pacific Flyway Center project, which had its public review and appeal period close on June 2nd. No appeals were received on either project and they can now move forward. On June 18th, council staff released the staff draft determination for the Lookout Slough Tidal Habitat Restoration and Flood Improvement Project, which can be found on the project's covered action website. The determination hearing for the project has been scheduled for July 15th and 16th via Zoom. More information on the hearing process and schedule are available on the hearing notice released yesterday, June 23rd. Please continue to adhere to the council's ex parte restrictions as the certification undergoes the appeals process. If you have any questions, please contact me or council Vera Bezdicek. I have one personnel announcement to share. Please join me in welcoming Abbott Dutton as our new Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for External Affairs and Communications. Abbott joins us from the Department of Pesticide Regulation, where she was Director of Communications. Before that, she was Media Relations Manager with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And before joining the state, Abbott spent almost 20 years in Sacramento media, including with iHeartMedia, Public News Service, and CBS Sacramento as a reporter and host of Good Day Sacramento. So we're excited to have Abbott join our team. And Abbott, I don't know if you're there. If so, if you want to say a quick hello. And if not, we'll make sure that you interact with the council members very soon. Moving on, the outreach highlights report and active projects lists are available in your board packets. Any questions, please let us know. And then I'll move on to our update from the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy as part of my executive officer's report. Joining us today is Campbell Ingram, the executive officer of the Delta Conservancy, here to provide us with an update on a variety of the Conservancy's activities as they relate to implementation of the Delta Plan and the Council's mission. Campbell, are you there?
I am here. Good morning, everyone. I've got a strange little notice that it was going to reboot me right when you called my name. I panicked a bit. Good morning, Chair Tatayan and council members. It's great to be with you this morning and to provide an update on the Delta Conservancy. I'd like to do a couple things for the new council members, just very briefly, just a bit of an overview about who we are and what we do, and in that same vein, provide a very brief update. And then I'm going to turn it over to Bruce DeGennaro with the Essex Partnership. He's the program manager for the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program. And he's going to very quickly walk you through an overview of an analysis that was jointly funded by the Conservancy and the Stewardship Council, looking at juvenile salmonid habitat in the Delta and what we might be able to do to enhance that. So the Delta Conservancy, in 30 seconds or less, we are a state agency. We do ecosystem restoration and economic development in the Delta. So we think of ourselves as a partner to the Stewardship Council, helping to do implementation. We have an independent board that includes 5 county supervisors. Supervisor Natoli is on our board and has been for many years. We greatly appreciate his service. And then 6 other voting members on our board. We run 2 significant grant programs. Our first is Proposition 1, and that is a total of $50 million for ecosystem restoration projects. We currently have 29 projects out there on the landscape, affecting over 5,000 acres. And I like to say that they are all unanimously supported by the local interests. So we're charged with working very closely with the community to try to do restoration that works for the community as well as provides ecological function. The key update here is that we are going to open our 5th and final solicitation for Proposition 1 projects here at the end of the month. We have about $3 million left in that pot, so that will be the total amount available. And full concept proposals will be due in the end of August. Full proposals will be due mid-December, and then we will evaluate those and make decisions early next year. We also run a Proposition 68 grant program, and that's for economic development. And in that program, we are evaluating a total of 9 proposals right now, anything from any way that we can increase recreation, tourism, access, and even historic preservation in the Delta. In fact, the Pacific Flyway project that Jessica just mentioned moments ago has a proposal working through our system to help fund a portion of that project. So we're looking forward to helping to contribute to that if we ultimately can do so. The Conservancy also works on Delta subsidence and related carbon emission issues. We also have a lead scientist that is heavily engaged with all the science activity at the Stewardship Council and throughout the Delta. We work on invasive species issues. Typically, we try to engage on various planning and coordination issues, particularly around restoration in the Delta. So that's a very quick overview of what we're up to lately, and happy to answer any questions. If there are no questions, we'll turn it over to Bruce to run you through some slides that talk about the jointly funded salmonid project. Oh, one other thing I'll just mention very quickly, that project, the results of that project are very important in our upcoming grant solicitation. So we direct applicants to that report so that they can actually think about the information in that report and how potentially to direct projects that they would like to see happen based on the science and information that's in that report. So take it away, Bruce.
Thanks, Campbell. Pleasure to be here. Good morning, all. I can make this fairly brief, but I'm excited to talk about this project because I think it's a really great example of working together, which obviously we can always do a lot more when we work side by side. So as Campbell mentioned, this was a joint initiative. The Delta Science Program provided some funding. The Delta Conservancy provided some additional funding and some contract administration, and brought SFEI in to help run the project and manage the project. And then through CSAMP, we provided some in-kind services with a science advisory group that I helped facilitate and just help guide the process. So, you know, great example of cooperation, and I think it also shows in the quality of the product. And I'm just going to run through 3 slides to just highlight what the project was. The full report is available on CSAM's website, and happy to make that available on request also. As this slide shows, the purpose here was really to provide a resource for restoration planning. It was focused on juvenile salmonid rearing in the Delta, which turns out is something we don't know a lot about, in large part because at the size of a rearing fish at a fry, we can't tag them and track them. It's hard to know exactly where they are. But some of the otolith work that has been done in recent years does show that fry are rearing in the Delta, have historically reared in the Delta, and it's an important kind of component of a life history diversity that we really want to be mindful of. And so this is intended, the intent here was to really look at that issue. What do we know about habitat in the Delta that might support rearing fry? Where is it? What are the characteristics of it if we want to make more of it? And ultimately, as it mentions there in the second bullet, the intent is to support future Prop 1 submittals, so that when people look at doing projects, if they're intended to benefit salmon, that they can rely on this as a resource to see where there might be good opportunities to do that, as well as what kinds of considerations they should think about as they do that. And then obviously that all supports the third bullet there, just making our investments more effective. So Brandon, if you want to go to the next slide. I'll apologize in advance because of the size of this. It's not very legible, but I'm going to walk you through this very, very briefly. This is a bit of an executive summary. SFEI did a lot of mapping as part of this. And as I'll talk about in the next slide, we're working on trying to make those products more accessible to the public and to researchers. But the map on the left obviously is the Delta, and you see some colored areas, and that the yellow areas are areas that we identified as opportunities to build on good existing habitat. So, you know, one obvious strategy here is where we know there's good habitat for rearing, let's try to improve that and invest there. And so what you see in yellow are those areas that were identified, areas up in the Cache Slough area, what's shown as A up here to the upper left. In the confluence area, there's some really good habitat. And then over in the kind of Cosumnes, McCollum area, there's also some really good habitat that we know that would be worthy of trying to protect and improve. What's shown in yellow is kind of the next category, which is where we think there's opportunities to restore suitable habitat. Maybe the current conditions aren't very good, but for a number of reasons, it would be worth investing. One of those reasons is it just tends to be along a known migratory corridor. So you see what's shown here is, I think that's an F, is along the main stem of the Sacramento, and then that carries down into H, and I think that's an E. And we know, obviously, all of our Sacramento run salmonids are coming through there. Another consideration here is just connecting areas of good habitat, creating kind of refuge along the way, if you will. So there are these orange areas along the Sacramento, and then also along the San Joaquin to the south, where we think there's some real opportunities to basically enhance conditions. And then lastly, thirdly, there's these red areas, which is mostly in the central Delta, which is shown as J there, are areas where we just need more study. We just don't know enough about what the opportunities might be in those areas. And so if there were investments, they would be in better understanding and some research. And then the last thing I just want to mention is you'll see these kind of triangular exclamation points, and those just represent kind of warning signs where we know there could be entrainment issues and areas where you might not want to attract rearing fry to those areas, and, to avoid putting them in harm's way, if you will. So anyway, I know you can't read all this text, but it talks about each one of these areas. And again, this isn't intended to be an executive summary, if you will. The report goes into a lot more detail on these different areas and aspects of restoration consideration. So one more slide, and then I'll close, and happy to take questions if you have them. We've been thinking a lot about next steps. One of the next steps is just to do things like this meeting where we make people aware of this resource and just promote it more and make sure it gets into the hands of those that may want to pursue projects. But as I mentioned, some other things we are thinking about is making the mapping more accessible and making it available online. And I already mentioned number 2 here, just elevating awareness of the report. And then there's some additional considerations on things that are challenging to map, hydrodynamics and criteria around velocity, which is very dynamic and changing with the tides. And surprisingly, our knowledge of some of the shoreline conditions and substrates is limited. And so there's a potential opportunity to map and understand that better. And then the 4th bullet there is just also just continuing to understand some of the other stressors that would be important in terms of where you would invest restoration dollars, for example, predation and contaminants. So that was all I was going to say. This is mostly just to make you aware that this work was done. I think it's a great resource. It's a great example of cooperation, as I said, and we hope that it will improve the quality of the proposals that are submitted through Prop 1 or other funding sources. So happy to take any questions if folks have them.
Council members, any questions for Campbell or Bruce?
Chair Tatayan, I have
Yes, Virginia.
A question. I'm all about economic development and would like to hear more about your tourism and recreation planning with regard to Prop 68. And a question is, do you at all get involved with Visit California or the California Travel and Tourism Board? Something that I have worked on in the past, and I continue to see that there's some real discrepancies with regard to our rivers, especially in the Great Central Valley. And they do offer a lot of travel and tourism opportunities, but yet they just seem to fall flat with regard to statewide planning, statewide integration, to again incorporate those into a larger landscape with Visit California or even with the California Travel and Tourism Board. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for asking. Yes. I would say we work across the board to try to enhance tourism opportunities in the Delta. We work very closely with the Delta Protection Commission as well. In the past, we've partnered on developing a 5-year marketing strategy for the Delta. And one of the things that resulted from that was the development of visitcadelta.gov, which is a really wonderful platform where you can go in and you can see everything that's available to you in the Delta. It's mapped and interactive. So that's really exciting. We're currently, again, in partnership with the Delta Protection Commission, running marketing and tourism workshops for local interest within the Delta. In fact, I think there's one this week we were kind of joking about it. It's in-person marketing, but of course it's a virtual meeting because we're still under COVID. So yes, I think it's a great, there's been a great deal of coordination, and the challenge I think is always just having the resources to maintain that coordination and maintain those type of sites. And then our Prop 68 program actually just allows us to actually put dollars towards some of the efforts. Again, as I mentioned, we have 9 projects that are working through our project process, and some are public access, there's some historic preservation. We just funded our first park improvement project. And so that's kind of the other side of it, is being able to bring some resources to things that are identified in the planning efforts as well as the marketing efforts.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Are there any other questions? Well, I do have a question for Bruce. Could you give us a sense of the amount of time and maybe even resources it took to get to this point, and also the collaborators on this effort?
Sure. So I think that the funding on this project, correct me, Campbell, if I'm wrong, was around 200,000, I think. I can't remember exactly, but that roughly.
That's
right?
correct, I think.
Yeah. And now that didn't include some in-kind staff resources that I mentioned CSAM provided. But that gives you a sense for the level of effort that went into this. Susan, remind the second half of your question is kind of where we go from here. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Well, I'm curious, in addition to San Francisco Estuary Institute, I'm just
other people.
wondering other partners. I don't think everyone is familiar with who is on the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program. And I'm imagining this was a cast of
Many,
yeah.
Yeah, CSAMP is a pretty large collaborative effort. It really has kind of three legs of the stool, if you will. It has all of our state and federal agency partners that have some stewardship responsibility, CDFW, Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Fisheries, as well as DWR and the Bureau. So those are our 5, well, actually we have a state board also. So those are kind of our 6 state and federal agencies. So they were actively engaged. And then the second leg is the public water agencies, and that represents a pretty wide group, both north and south, south of Delta water users that rely on state and federal water, as well as Sacramento settlement contractors and others. So it's a pretty good representation, also including in Delta users, primarily Contra Costa. And then the third leg is the NGO leg, the environmental community, EDF, the Bay Institute, Defenders of Wildlife, the Nature Conservancy. So they're also all represented. The policy group, which is kind of our executive board, if you will, for the collaborative, is a 20-member board. So that gives you some idea. And then those board members represent others as well. So on this initiative, all of those member agencies, or not all of them, but a lot of them provided staff that had expertise in salmon biology, whether they were agency staff or state federal agency staff, or they were public water agency staff or NGO staff. So that gives you a pretty good idea. We also brought in some academic researchers that had expertise. We looked to other places, particularly up in the Northwest, where they've done a lot on looking at estuarine systems and how salmonids use those for rearing. So we tried to reach pretty widely there, and they had a number of consultants involved that have experience in those areas as well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better flavor for who was involved.
Yes, thanks, Bruce.
Sure.
It's often reports don't reflect the amount of time and resources and the many collaborators. So thanks for going through that.
Yeah, well, and thanks to the council and to the Delta Conservancy for their support and involvement. We really couldn't have done it if it wasn't a joint effort. And I should recognize, I know Leo Winternetz isn't here, but is a member of the or as a board member for the council, and Leo was a big part of kind of this was early on was an idea that he had that kind of launched this vision. So, and as is so often the case, Leo's had a lot of influence in what we did here.
Well, are there any other questions for Campbell or Bruce? Okay, hearing none. Is there any public comment on this item?
There is a public comment from Deidre Desjardins.
Okay.
This is Deirdre Desjardins, and I'm really surprised that there isn't any discussion for the Council of SB 821, which is in your legislative update package. This is a critical issue that's facing the council, and you should have had the same kind of briefing that the Delta Independent Science Board had about this item. I did send the council members our comment letter. We have an advocacy team that is following the legislation closely. The legislation would not take effect until January 2022. It's a regular bill, and so it wouldn't authorize you to even start to issue contracts until January 2022. And that's a concern. We did try to get this in to the budget, possibly as a trailer bill, but it's not being handled that way. And we're very concerned about the delay. The new members have been working, were promised in a national search that they would get a part-time salary. And they've stayed on at a rate of $100 per diem. I don't know any other state employees who would have stayed on in those kind of conditions. And I don't think it's fair to ask them to do that, and particularly not without additional staff. There was a discussion of this. One of the things we're recommending, so that there's better communication between the council members and the Delta Stewardship Council members, is that you have formal consideration of the Delta Independent Science Board budget and staffing requests. And we're asking the legislature to enact that into law, so that, because there has been no transparency about what the Delta Independent Science Board budget is this year. And we can't even find the Delta Stewardship Council's own budget. There's no reports of it. And there was about $650,000 of funding that was lost when the compensation was changed. And our point of view is that could have hired additional staff. It could have hired scientists under contract. Again, the $100 per diem is not a model where the board members do the work. It's a model where the staff does the work under direction of the board. And it is just, there is a National Research Council model. They have staff. The Delta Independent Science Board members are aware of that. They're all experts. Many of them have served on many different scientific panels, IPCC, NRC. There's Lisa Wanger has been chair of the Chesapeake Bay Science Advisory Committee. And you need to have a better channel of communication as you resolve this issue and as you look at the legislation. The other concern they have is the legislation puts into statute that they'll be paid at a research scientist 5 rate, which is the highest level of state compensation under salary. But there were concerns that that doesn't consider that it's contract compensation, and they wouldn't get benefits, and that's about another 30 to 40%. And it's significant. The members serve 10 years, and they don't get retirement, they don't get sick leave, they don't get vacation, they don't get a whole host of other benefits. So that's also a significant concern, and we've advocated that they get an increased rate that's commensurate with, we think like a minimum, it should be $100 an hour. So I want to say, I'm just shocked that there's no briefing whatsoever in this legislation, and it's just put in your packet, and there's no briefing whatsoever for the council and no provision of time to discuss it. You haven't had an agenda item since this started to publicly present the issue for the crisis and what's being done. And I think that needs to change going forward, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre.
Chair Tatayan, if I may.
Sure, Jessica.
Before you went to public comment, I was actually going to comment that I hadn't yet concluded my executive officer's report. And so if I may, at this time, I would like to call on Ryan Stambra, who's our former legislative advisor, currently our chief deputy, to say a few words about SB 821.
Yeah, certainly.
Certainly, yeah. Ryan, before you start, I just wanted to point out that we did touch on this at the last council meeting. And so go ahead. We'll hear your update.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Tatayan. Pleasure to be back before you, members, and thank you, Jessica. As Jessica mentioned, I'm Ryan Stambra. I'm the council's chief deputy executive officer, and I can provide a brief update on SB 821 by Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee, which was recently amended on June the 8th. As you may recall, SB 821 previously did two things, really. It stated that members of the ISB, the Independent Science Board, were not employees of the Delta Stewardship Council, or would not be employees of the Delta Stewardship Council as a result of the bill, and affirmed that members of the ISB would continue to exercise their own independent scientific judgment and conduct their statutory mission independent of the council. Those two provisions remain in the bill. The June 8th amendment to the bill adds a provision directing the council to contract with members of the board at an hourly rate equivalent to that of a research specialist 5, as Ms. Desjardins pointed out, which approximately equates to a $60 to $80 per hour pay range, depending on the pay step utilized. Now, SB 821 passed out of the Senate in early May on a vote of 37-0 and is currently scheduled to be heard in its Assembly Policy Committee on July the 1st, which is in advance of a July 14th Policy Committee deadline that the bill must pass out of its Policy Committee before that July 14th date in order to remain active for the year. Now, I think it's important to also note, as we look a little bit further down the calendar, there are a few additional dates that I would like to highlight. August 27th is the last day for fiscal committees to pass bills to the floor. Bills on the floor must be passed by September 10th to be considered by the governor. And the governor, under that circumstance, would have until October 10th to take action. One thing I would just note is that while we did note that the bill has been amended on June the 8th, it is very possible and maybe even potentially likely that the bill will be amended at least one more time. I know I'm aware of discussions ongoing around the compensation issue. And it's something that obviously staff are continuing to track closely and provide technical assistance as appropriate. Happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Questions? Susan?
Yes, Don.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, and certainly thanks to the callers for their comments. And I just wanted to ask Ryan, so with the current language in the legislation of putting it in a classification that has a certain salary range, would that be comparable to what was pre July 2020, or was there no limitations under those contracts that were negotiated? Obviously, arrangements made with various scientists over time, over probably almost a decade. How does that, I guess I'm just curious, how does that compare to before last July unfolded with this? So.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councilmember Natoli. So the research specialist 5, as I noted, it provides a salary range, and so that is really where, depending on where they would start in that range, which the legislation itself does not specifically prescribe, that is the range of between $60 and $80 or thereabouts. Before July 2020, when the Independent Science Board members were under contract, I believe their rate was set at closer to about $200 per hour.
So if I just deduct from what you just said, then, so there's still a significant difference between what's being contemplated, at least legislatively, and the arrangement that was made under contract with those who served and continue to serve, obviously, and now are under the current procedures and application of the $100 per diem. So just be clear, so you said it has to pass out of the assembly by July 14th. Is that correct, Ryan? I understand.
It has to, the bill has to pass out of its assembly, its policy committee in the assembly.
Out of the committee, okay.
By July 14th, and then August 27th, out of appropriations, September 10th, it would have to pass off of the floor to be considered by the governor. So it still has to, as you're aware, pass out of the assembly and then go back for concurrence in the Senate once it moves beyond the fiscal committee.
Okay. And just one final question, and if there are, again, I think to Chair Tatayan's comments earlier in response to some of the earlier comments, obviously the value of the Independent Science Board and the work that they do, I don't think can be, overstated. It's very, very important, and I think the scientists that weighed in, one Delta, one Science, and the good work, and again, just hearing last report from the Conservancy, and as it relates to species and to the environment and to interactions between humans and the various aspects of Delta daily life for all creatures. I think it's really important, but I don't get the sense that this is not an urgency measure. So as soon as this could be resolved, to Deidre's point, it would be, if it was legislatively, it would be January of 2022. Is that accurate?
That is correct. Currently, the bill does not contain an urgency measure, so the effective date would be January 1 of next year. I am aware that there are some discussions of considering an urgency clause being added to the bill, which then would mean that once the bill is signed, it would take effect immediately. However, the one aspect I would note, the urgency clause, if it were to be added, would then raise the vote threshold required on the floor from a majority vote to a 2/3 vote.
Okay. It didn't sound like it was a problem in the Senate, though, if you had 37 out of 40, so that they had that pretty easily. But that was under the measure that was currently constructed. So, okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Certainly. Any other questions from other council members?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Certainly, yes.
Thank you. I would like to reiterate what other members have expressed here, and we certainly appreciate Deirdre's diligence on this issue and her concern. And We have been briefed. We do regular check-ins with the executive officer and have been given details on how the bill is progressing. I'm very hopeful that an urgency clause can be added in Assembly Policy Committee because I think it's warranted in this case. But to reiterate again, this is a matter of great importance to the council. And so I appreciate everyone's diligence, staff in particular, with moving the bill through, and remain optimistic that it will get through and be implemented sooner rather than later.
Great. Thank you, Christy.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan, and thanks earlier to Campbell and to Bruce. I just have a couple quick items to close out my executive officer's report, if I may, Chair.
Certainly.
We do not have a formal legal update today, but I do want to preview the rest of the agenda items on the calendar. We do have a busy morning ahead of us and some real milestone action items for a few of the council's key work plan priorities. We're going to be asking next for approval of the Delta Science Program Research Awards. This is funding for critical science investigations to inform Delta decision-making. We're also going to ask the council to consider and approve our Delta Adapts Vulnerability Assessment and associated CEQA exemption for that item. And finally, the Department of Water Resources is going to be here to provide us with an update on the 2021 drought salinity rock barrier installation in the Delta. And with that, unless there are any other questions, I conclude my executive officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Let's move on to agenda item 7, the lead scientist report from our lead scientist, Dr. Laura Larson.
Good morning, council members. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, in just a bit, you will be hearing from me and Delta Science Program staff about the bright future of Delta Science as we present to you our package of funding recommendations for projects starting as early as September. But now, at the start of this lead scientist report, I'd like to take you with me on a journey into the past. So just for a moment, close your eyes and imagine what the Delta might have looked like just prior to colonization by European settlers. What do you see? If you see a lot of green, swampy land, you probably have a pretty accurate picture in mind. Coming out of the late Holocene period, this landscape had experienced relatively steady sea levels, rising only slightly over time. These conditions were conducive to the formation of an extensive marshland through the whole Delta area. Now open your eyes and I'll ask Brandon to put up the slide. So were you picturing something like the top image that you see there? You know, the modern Delta is a far cry from the extensive marshlands of the past. But one of the things that scientists still don't have a good handle on is how these extensive changes to the structure of the landscape functions. For example, how much of the decline of the species that we manage for, like fish species in particular, is due to this broad scale landscape conversion versus other factors, diversions and nutrients. And to what extent are those negative impacts reversible by, for example, restoring wetlands? These questions are particularly difficult to answer in the Delta because unlike counterpart ecosystems in the Everglades, Chesapeake Bay, and southern Louisiana, such a tremendous fraction of the original wetlands have been lost. It might be that the benefits of wetlands for many of the species we're interested in managing for might not be apparent until a threshold coverage of wetlands is reached, and we may still be far from that threshold. As a result, the value of wetland restoration has been a bit difficult to demonstrate, which has led to a lot of uncertainty and debate about the role of wetland restoration in the ongoing voluntary agreements negotiations. Recently, in a synthesis study funded jointly by the Delta Science Program and the U.S. Geological Survey, former ISB member Jim Claren set out to quantify how loss of these historic wetlands influenced the Delta's total primary production, and specifically the infusion of fuel into the base of the food web. The authors first synthesized data from the scientific literature to quantify average rates of primary production in 5 communities: phytoplankton, attached microalgae, aquatic plants, marsh plants, and woody riparian vegetation. We did this separately for wet years and dry years. And then based on this information and the distribution of these communities among 5 habitat types, they constructed a model of primary production and applied that model to the historic landscape, which they reconstructed based on historical maps that were available. This gave them a historic baseline. Finally, they developed estimates for habitat coverage in a delta for which all restoration targets specified in the Delta Plan had been met. And they applied their model to that hypothetical landscape to evaluate how the target amount of wetland restoration could improve fuel supply to Delta food webs. Let me hit the highlights of their results. So first of all, based on their historical landscape reconstruction, they found that the Delta has lost 77% of its hydrologically connected habitat, with more than 98% of its tidal and non-tidal marsh area lost between today and the early 19th century. Unfortunately, marsh plants produced an order of magnitude more carbon in the historic landscape than any other community groups examined. And so this 77% loss of marshland translated into a 94% loss in primary productivity across the Delta, and specifically an 89% loss of food supply to herbivores at the base of the food chain. This represents a tremendous hit to the food web, which surely has had major negative consequences for native consumer fish. Can we reverse these consequences through wetland restoration? Well, the authors of this paper suggest that we can begin to. If all of the habitat targets for marsh and riparian restoration in the Delta Plan are met, they estimate that we would recover 12% of the Delta's historical primary production. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, 12%, but considering that this number nearly triples the fuel currently available to the food web, it could potentially make huge gains for the ecosystem relative to its current state. One other interesting point made in this paper, which is especially relevant to the current drought situation we are facing, is that the portions of the landscape contributing the most to primary productivity have been substantially reconfigured. And this has big consequences for the variability, the year-to-year variability of food supply. Historically, primary production was primarily sourced from plants and marshes and attached algae. And these landscapes were inundated during most years. Now that is mostly gone, but woody plants are a relatively large contributor behind open water, which was the smallest contributor historically. What this means is that the difference in the provisioning of food to the food chain now, unlike in the past, swings drastically between wet years and dry years, governed by the inundation of woody riparian zones and their reconnection to fish habitat. In other words, wetlands could provide food security to Delta food chains, making them more resilient to drought. These results really could be a game changer when it comes to agencies taking seriously the charge to restore wetlands and implement nature-based solutions to management challenges. So let's share them widely among our colleagues and continue to get the word out. Any questions on that paper before I proceed? And I should mention that this is a paper that has just come out in the journal Science of the Total Environment.
Virginia.
Just a quick question, Dr. Larson, and that is, you say we can get started, right? We don't know that if we can fully restore the wetlands, but what would be a reasonable timeline, if you will?
So I believe the timeline that is written into the Delta Plan is reasonable. And, you know, when it comes to restoration of wetlands, the sooner we can get a start on restoring these landscapes, the better. A number of our listed fish species are in a period of precipitous decline. We're likely to see additional really drastic declines in these native fishes, particularly during drought year. And so anything that we can do in the near future to produce habitat that is connected to where the fish are and is known to produce relatively large amounts of phytoplankton and zooplankton that really supplies that food chain, the better off we are in this rapidly changing situation.
But we need to get started now.
We need to get started now. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Especially if we want to avoid extinctions or further endangerment of listed species. Great question.
Yes.
The others? So before I get into my segment on Delta Science Program updates, I also just want to flag one additional item in the literature for you. The ISB's paper on preparing scientists, policymakers, and managers for a fast-forward future is now out in the current issue of San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Sciences. So I just wanted to let you know about that and remind you that SFUS is an open source journal that's partially funded by the Delta Stewardship Council. And what this means for you is that all of the articles are free to access. Just head over to their website to look at this ISB publication, which really is the call to action that underlay the Science Needs Assessment Workshop and the current Science Needs Assessment Work Group. And now I'll take the opportunity to segue into some Delta Science Program updates. And the first thing I want to start with is just a really brief update on the Delta Lead Scientist Office Hours series. We recently held the third episode of Delta Lead Scientist Office Hours. Program Manager Dylan Stern within the Delta Science Program was my co-host. And in that session, we talked about funding Delta Science. So not just the funding that the Delta Stewardship Council provides, but other agencies. What are the different types of science that is funded within the Delta? And what are some of the upcoming opportunities within the Delta Science Program to get the most exciting work funded? My next session on July 15th, again at noon, will also focus on funding, but my plan for that is to spotlight some of the specific work that we are funding. And I still need to secure a co-host for that, but I'm hoping that one of the PIs on the proposals that we're recommending for funding will co-host that with me. And so for future reference, if any of you or anyone attending this meeting is interested in attending these office hours and submitting your questions, you can do so by logging into the Delta Stewardship Council Instagram at Delta Stewardship Council, and tune in around noon for, these are held on the third Thursday of the month. Again, the next one is July 15th, and that will enable you to watch the live session. So in terms of my next update, there's been a lot of progress on the Science Action Agenda. And just as a reminder, the Science Action Agenda is one element of our threefold science strategy, where the other elements are the Delta Science Plan and the State of Bay Delta Science. The Science Action Agenda is really front and center for today's sets of presentations, because the Science Action Agenda is what sets the priorities for the funding that we do within the Delta. It's a document that aligns science needs with management priorities. So the current Science Action Agenda is expiring at the end of this year, and the 2022 to 2026 update to the Science Action Agenda is underway. This has been an ongoing collaborative process that's involved a series of workshops in 2020 to develop a set of management questions. You've also heard about a progress summary on the last Science Action Agenda that the team recently completed. And there have been series of stakeholder engagement surveys to rank, merge, group, prioritize management questions. And there's a similar survey that is out now in preparation for the upcoming Science Actions workshop to develop draft science actions. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. In late May, so this is one of the latest things that I've reported on. In late May, the Delta Science Program circulated the draft management needs for the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda for public review. And that public feedback was requested to ensure that those needs accurately reflected overarching and pressing gaps in management. The final list of management needs is available, and it will shape the Science Actions workshop in July, because those science actions are going to be crafted directly in response to those management needs. So the Science Actions Workshop is going to be held on July 13th through 14th, again in a fully virtual format. And this workshop will consider the top 65 Delta management questions grouped within these management needs in order to develop priority science actions and rank them. Registration just recently closed, and we are expecting over 100 participants. So last, I just want to flag that you have a by the numbers report prepared by the state fellow, the Sea Grant State Fellow, Karen Gutierrez. It reflects drought conditions, not surprisingly, with the Sacramento River flowing at just 61% of what's typical this time of year. The San Joaquin River is just at 20%, and combined Central Valley Project and State Water Project diversions are at just 21%. So we are going to segue into the next agenda item, which will be to present the package of projects we're recommending for funding. But before we go there, I just want to make sure or want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions, and we'll go to public comments as well.
I have one.
Maria.
When you said 21% for State Water Project.
Yes,
That
Central
is-
Valley Project plus State Water Project.
Okay, that is 20% of average or 20%
Of what, yes,
The
of
capacity.
long-term average for this month.
average?
Yes.
Okay, so it's like 79% lower, something like that. Is that a good way to understand it? Okay.
Yes, that's a good way to understand it.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions or comments from the council, is there any public comment on agenda item 7?
There is not.
Great, thank you, Beck.
Sorry, really quick. Beck, it looks like there is a hand raised in the attendee side.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Is the commenter still with us?
Yeah, just 1 second. It's your Desjardins.
Okay.
It's Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research, and I wanted to thank the lead scientist for her leadership and work. I did have a concern. The Delta Independent Science Board wrote the council a letter in 2019 to 2020 about science in a time of rapid climate change. And one of their recommendations was that the Stewardship Council convene a panel of leading scientists. And I think that still needs to be done, and particularly because this science needs assessment is being completed when the Delta Independent Science Board simply doesn't have adequate funding. But I just wanted to say that in my primary research career, I had the privilege of working with some of the top research groups in the world in several different fields. And my experience with world-class scientists is that they just have extraordinary clarity of thought and insight and breadth of knowledge, and they're absolutely irreplaceable. And while I very much appreciate the collaborative process, it also tends to come up with sort of a lowest common denominator of consensus items that are non-controversial. And that's not going to get us through in this time of rapid climate change. We need that kind of insight. And from world-class scientists and from people who are willing to really take a hard look at these expert problems. And the Delta Science Program is a continuation of the CalFed Science Program, and it was designed to have both collaborative science, which the science program is doing, and independent peer review and oversight by world-class scientists. And we really need the balance of both kinds of input. So I hope that you will consider that and find a way to fund it in this process. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Deirdre. Well, if there are no other public comments, let's move on to agenda item 8.
Oh, sorry.
Actually,
Go ahead, Beck.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, OSHA Reserve has her hand raised as well.
Okay.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, OSHA Reserve for Local Agencies of the North Delta. Sorry, I was just switching between phone and my computer, so sorry to dive in at the last sec. But I just wanted to comment, from a local agency and landowner perspective, I very much appreciate the update from Dr. Larson about, what the opportunities and values may be of wetland restoration within the Delta. But I think we always have to temper that with the realities of the fact that most of the Delta is in private ownership and is very productive farmland. And it's the largest swath of, prime farmland in the entire state. And it's one of the only areas that's not threatened by conversion and development. And so we could really look forward to, from a farmland perspective, the Delta being a place where we can continue to have these amazing productivity from our crops and especially, row crops and things that are very wildlife friendly. We're part of the Pacific Flyway. So there's a lot of, as you all know, there's a lot of different values being provided by the Delta. And it's just really important when we talk about wetland conversion that it be tempered by the knowledge of the people who are already there. And, there definitely may be places where it's possible to try to recreate some of the connectivity that has been identified as being potentially valuable for food production. I think, some of those projects are being undertaken as biological opinion requirements of the state and federal water projects. But, as we've talked about a lot in the past, connecting, these levied islands to, some of the kind of aspirational drawings that we've seen about what might happen in the Delta, like North Delta Arc, and like connecting up, areas like Clarksburg, which is like a major wine production region, to be like, oh yeah, that'd make a great wetland. Not so much, you're not going to have local support for that. It's not feasible. It, creates huge flood control issues. It's, very expensive, so we really need to look for those opportunities where restoration can occur that's compliant with, we've been promoting good neighbor policies, and I appreciate the council and staff support in trying to get that incorporated as, a suggestion in future updates to the plan. But, and I think like the Delta Restoration Framework and some of the work that the Conservancy and Fish and Wildlife have done is really supportive of this. And the other thing that we really want to see is a commitment that there would never be eminent domain for restoration. And that may be a subject that I don't know exactly where it fits into the Delta plan, but I think it should be part of the Delta plan, honestly, because, when you start talking about taking people's land by force for restoration, then you slip the rug out from underneath the potential for local communities and local governments to be able to support these kind of activities. And nationwide, in the Everglades and otherwhere that I've looked at, it's really just not a practice to take land for restoration, and it shouldn't be a practice here in the Delta either. And it doesn't create the kind of support that I think we all would like to see for, valuable restoration projects. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, OSHA. Well, before I move on, I want to make certain there are no other public comments on this item.
No more public comments.
Great, thank you. Then let's move on to agenda item 8, consideration and possible approval of the Delta Science Program Research Awards pursuant to the 2021 Joint Delta Science Proposal Solicitation. Jessica, are you starting this off?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm excited. This is a good day for funding Delta Science. Before the council for consideration is the approval of 34 contracts for 16 research projects as part of the 2021 Joint Delta Science Proposal Solicitation Notice. This is a collaborative effort with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and facilitated by California Sea Grant. The recommended projects directly respond to high priority science action areas and are really emblematic of the Council and Delta Science Program's leadership on collaborative science efforts in the Delta and will forge lasting partnership with Delta Science into the future. With that, I'd like to invite to the virtual table Dr. Laurel Larson, Dylan Stern, our program manager for the science funding process, Emily Reisner, California Sea Grant Fellow, and Josh Israel, Science Division Chief from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation Bay Delta Office.
Thank you, JP. And could I get the slides, please, Brandon? So I'm happy to kick off this presentation of the projects that we're recommending for funding through this proposal solicitation. As most of you are aware, this presentation is the culmination of approximately a year of work, but with the seeds of that work planted even long before that. Next slide. So I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of the PSN process and the package that we're recommending for funding. And then I'm going to turn the floor over to our funding partners at the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for a few words. Funding Program Manager Dylan Stern will then describe the coordinated review process that we undertook to arrive at the funding decisions, and Sea Grant State Fellow Emily Reisner will take us home with a spotlight on 4 of the projects in the package. Next slide. So starting with the big picture, go on. The Delta Science Program's mission, as written in the Delta Reform Act of 2009, is to provide the best possible unbiased scientific information to inform water and environmental decision-making in the Delta. That mission shall be carried out through funding research. But the seed for this funding program was planted even before the Delta Reform Act, initiating in the CalFed days. Awards from 2004, 2006, 2007, and 2010 started growing the Delta science community and its body of knowledge as we know it today. Science is iterative and incremental. It builds upon itself just as a tree grows taller and creates new branches and leaves. In the case of Delta science, our tree was initially on the spindly and sparse side. Those early funding solicitations were inconsistent in their timing, making it difficult to plan ongoing continued work and stranding some projects before they reached their natural completion. The Delta science community really needs predictable funding calls to properly address pressing issues. Next slide. So unfortunately, after 2010, our little tree experienced a multi-year drought as no solicitations were again offered until 2019. This drought stymied the growth of Delta science as external funds are almost always needed for scientists outside of state and federal agencies to do their work. In particular, progress on foundational science that's not legally mandated and not part of ongoing monitoring is halted in the absence of the competitive funding programs. So one notable exception to the prevailing funding drought conditions in the last decade, though, is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Proposition 1 Restoration Grant Program, which has offered competitive grant awards since 2015. But for the Delta Science Program, watering the tree that sprouted during the CalFed days during this time took the form of filling key science knowledge gaps with directed actions. However, recognizing that competitive solicitations that attract the best and brightest are really the gold standard for science awards, the science program sought to offer competitive solicitations on a regular basis. And the realization of that goal is one of the most important aspects of the legacy left by my predecessor, former lead scientist, Dr. John Calloway. Together with Delta Science program staff, he was successful in instituting a biennial competitive proposal solicitation starting in 2019. The package that we are now presenting to you is the result of the second PSN originating from that particular initiative. Next slide. Trees create shade and build community, and the funding of Delta Science is no different. It has allowed the Delta Stewardship Council to form partnerships with other agencies to leverage collective resources to fund the highest priority science research projects. The 2019 solicitation involved a partnership between the Council, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and CDFW's Prop 1 grant program, with the state water contractors contributing additional funds. $16.9 million in funding was provided in that solicitation, distributed across 26 research projects. Since then, our tree has continued to grow. With this latest solicitation, our program has expanded into social science. Social science research can potentially transform our understanding of the Delta and would be quite relevant as well to the previous public comment that we just heard. But up to this point, it has been acutely underfunded. The Delta Science program is actively trying to change that and has begun seeking feedback, or has been seeking feedback from social scientists on how best to do so. This solicitation included a new category of awards, which we call Integrated Socio-Ecological Systems Awards, or ICs. These projects were required to be larger in scope than the standard research awards, involve multi-institution and multi-discipline collaborations, and examine the feedback that exists between biophysical and human components of Delta systems. Now, the last thing I'll say here is that with the expansion of our tree, the science investment has really been bearing fruit. Many of the projects that we've previously funded through our PSNs or Delta Science Fellows program have produced compelling results and led to follow-on research projects that were among the highest ranked proposals in this competitive review process. One example is Dr. Russ Perry of the U.S. Geological Survey, who was awarded 2010 PSN funding to develop new statistical models that improve our understanding of the factors that affect juvenile salmon migration routes and survival. That science was used in the California Water Fix biological assessment. Dr. Perry then received another award from the 2019 Delta Science solicitation and is now being recommended for funding in the 2021 Delta Science solicitation. This new work uses and improves those original statistical models, linking to other models and using new data to develop juvenile production estimates for juvenile salmon leaving the Delta. Another 2019 PSN awardee, Dr. Mariah Meek of Michigan State University, will be using new genomic methods that allow scientists to identify individual Chinook salmon and peek into their life history and location of origin. This information can be used in existing salmon life cycle models to assess how spring-run Chinook salmon populations might respond to future environmental changes and new habitat restoration projects. To keep our tree growing, the Delta Science program will continue to offer a Delta Science proposal solicitation every 2 years. Next slide. So let's take a quick look at this package that we are recommending for funding through the 2021 PSN. We received 99 proposals that requested almost $64 million in funds, representing nearly a doubling in the competitiveness of this round compared to 2019. Our 2021 solicitation was a partnership between the Council and U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, again with a plan for the water contractors to contribute additional funding for one of the projects pending approval by their board. Next slide. The impacts of these projects are expected to extend far beyond pure scientific advancement. Many of the projects provide opportunities for education and training in underserved communities or at the K-12 level, engage with a spectrum of Delta stakeholders, and produce tools that will aid in decision-making. All proposals were required to describe how they might benefit vulnerable communities within the Delta using a new tool that the Council has made available and that you will hear about more in the Delta Adapts presentation later. Next slide, please. The proposals that we received reflect interest from a broad swath of contracting entities, shown in blue, with national and international representation. The orange bars here show contracts in our package to collaborating entities with budgets that are greater than 50K. You can see that the package includes a pretty good diversity of these institution types. Next slide. In terms of topical areas of the proposals, this word cloud shows that restoration was the most common, followed by modeling, salmon, water, and ecology, but with really many different topics represented here. Amongst the proposals in the package that we are recommending for the award, we have worked to ensure a balance of topical areas that correspond to a balance in the science action areas from the science action agenda that they address. Next slide. So all proposals were required to be responsive to the 2016 to 2021 Science Action Agenda, and the proposals in our package cover a fairly even balance among action areas related to human dimensions, science synthesis, habitat restoration, stressors, species and communities, and monitoring, data management, and modeling. Additionally, 8% of the projects are directly responsive to actions outlined in the Sacramento River Science Partnership, which will be discussed by Josh Israel momentarily. Our total package consists of 16 projects, 2 of which are integrated socio-ecological systems awards. Most projects are collaborative with multiple institutions involved, so there are more contracts, 35, than projects. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Josh Israel of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, who is going to say more about our funding partnership.
Thanks, Laurel. Thank you, Chair Tatayan and the council members for your support of this 2021 Delta Science Awards. First, I'd just like to appreciate the Stewardship Council and Science Program staff who have been leading the administration and management efforts to support these proposal reviews, and now recipients with contracts. It's been a really immense amount of work that's gone into this. We've been tracking it with a few of your staff members, and we're just really excited about being able to support a number of innovative science activities totaling $3.4 million that have been selected through this solicitation. So it's really a great collaboration with the Delta Science Award program with the Delta Stewardship Council. You know, this project interweaves with some other projects we work with the Stewardship Council and Science Program on, such as the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee and Interagency Modeling Steering Committee. And we really think that these help to build a stronger science enterprise in the Central Valley and Bay Delta. And this is really important to us because a robust and trusted science enterprise helps to improve our planning capacities and informed decision-making as we're challenged with continuing environmental crises in the Bay Delta and the Central Valley. Reclamation scientists and managers have been participating quite a bit with the Delta Science Program staff, developing science priorities as part of their collaborative engagement on the Science Action Agenda. And we really think that the Science Action Agenda focus areas help us because they overlap with many of the areas of interest that stakeholders and agencies have identified as part of our priorities coming out of things like the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program that I think you may have heard from Bruce about earlier, and also the Sacramento River Science Partnership in the Upper Sacramento. Many of the awards selected will directly inform the science priorities of greatest interest to agencies and stakeholders in these science priorities or partnerships as well. And we're really hopeful to continue partnering with the Stewardship Council and Science Program on Delta Science proposal solicitations in the future. This program and the Delta Science Fellows really help to generate great opportunities for innovative science that help to reduce uncertainty and improve environmental and water and fish management decision-making. Next slide, please. Reclamation's very excited about the multiple awards that we are able to assist with funding through this 2021 Delta Science Awards, and you're going to be hearing about one of those from Emily in a moment related to collaborative science recovery planning we're very excited about. But let me share and highlight one of the projects selected that has the potential to inform fish and water management on the Sacramento River. This selected award will be to Dr. Alex Forrest at UC Davis to study the regulation of controls on cold water through the temperature control device on Shasta Dam as a means to support downstream fish populations. The temperature control device helps us manage the limited cold water pool through selective withdrawal from different parts of Shasta Reservoir to make sure that we can meet temperatures downstream for cold water fish like winter run Chinook salmon. This activity will collect measurements that addresses the science action area, agenda's focus area number 5 to modernize monitoring, data management, and modeling, and also the Sacramento River Science Partnership science planning activity to conduct velocity surveys to assess dynamics around the temperature control gate operating as they operate individually or as they're blending temperatures to optimize those releases downstream. This will really help us understand how the temperature control device is operating over time. Also, as part of our long-term operation of the Central Valley Project, Reclamation is undertaking a project to develop and implement new temperature models for temperature management at CVP reservoirs. Our current models are not open source and they don't always reflect conditions well when cold water is limited. This has really created uncertainty in summer temperature management. The results from this study may potentially be leveraged and help improve these new models that can then be used to help determine water project operations and optimize water project operations for more objectives. This new science can help improve our understanding for how forecasted and actual operations affect salmon population dynamics downstream and survival of early life stages of winter run Chinook salmon and other salmon species in the Sacramento River when cold water resources behind Shasta Dam are limited. I will stick around for any questions at the end, and I think I'm passing it over to Mr. Stern now.
Thanks, Josh, so much. And thank you also to Laurel. So hello, my name is Dylan Stern. I am the program manager for science funding processes at the Delta Science Program. Thank you, Chair Tatayan and council members for your time today. I'm just going to be briefly going over the solicitation timeline and the review process. So after the release of the proposal solicitation notice, we also call it the PSN, on November 9th, 2020, the council had held 2 informational webinars in both December and January, where applicants could call in and ask questions about the PSN. The deadline to submit proposals was February 12th, 2021. And then each proposal was thoroughly evaluated with a multi-step review over the course of March and May of this year. The final selection process ended this month after coordination meetings with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And just to remind you, we are here today to seek approval by the council of this over $9.6 million research portfolio, which signifies the culmination of an extensive review and selection process. Next slide, please. So the Delta Science Program is especially proud of our robust, thorough, and transparent review process. We've worked closely with our partners at California Sea Grant throughout the whole process, which began with an administrative review. So making sure the proposals check all the boxes for the requirements. And then each proposal was reviewed by a letter or mail review by a total of 85 subject matter experts. And due to the large number of proposals, 99, we needed to hold 3 review panels. And these review panels consisted of 31 subject matter experts from the Delta and across the world. The reviewers were asked to evaluate the proposals based on the criteria of scientific merit, relevance to the 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda, technical feasibility, the management relevance, adequacy of their data management plan, the reasonableness of their budget, the achievement of meaningful, broader impacts and benefits to vulnerable communities. In addition, the integrated socio-ecological system proposals, or ICES, were evaluated on the degree to which the social and biophysical scientific disciplines were meaningfully integrated, ensuring that the proposal will fully consider the bidirectional feedback between biophysical and social components of the system. And so in order to list of recommended proposals that we have today, the Delta lead scientist, Dr. Laurel Larson, considered the technical reviews and review panel recommendations that we received, the availability of funding, a balance of funding priorities, the coordination meetings with other partner agencies, scientific merit, the degree to which results can potentially inform management actions, and the merit and relevance of broader impacts. And so after the selection process was complete, the state water contractors were aware of the forthcoming awards and met with the Delta Science Program. And so we are glad to announce that they are also going to be contributing funds toward one of the projects, which expands the total award amount from this solicitation to over $10 million. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Emily Reisner, the Exceptional Sea Grant State Fellow in the Delta Science Program's Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit. Take it away, thank you.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Chair Tatayan and council members for your time. As Dylan mentioned, my name is Emily Reisner, and I am a 2021 California Sea Grant State Fellow in the Delta Science Program. And today I will be providing a brief spotlight on some of the research we are recommending for funding. So projects we are recommending for funding fall under 4 topic areas, which are of high interest in the science and management communities. And the majority of submitted proposals address these topic areas. Further, all proposals were responsive to the Science Action Agenda, and our selection reflects a representation of all Science Action Agenda action areas. Next, please. First, we are recommending 2 projects for funding that address harmful algal bloom drivers, trends, and impacts. Next, please. Second, we are recommending 7 projects for funding that support science tools to inform the management and recovery of migratory fishes. Next. Third, we are recommending 5 projects for funding that address multi-benefit wetland habitat and delta food webs. Next, please. And finally, we are recommending 2 projects for funding that are researching sea level rise and subsidence. In the next 4 slides, I will be highlighting major issues in each of these topic areas, as well as research projects we are recommending for funding that tackle those issues. Next slide, please. Harmful algal blooms are increasingly pervasive in the Delta and threaten ecosystem and human health. Therefore, understanding their causes and consequences will aid effective management. Next, please. One project we recommend for funding that addresses this is led by Dr. Hans Perl at the University of North Carolina. Dr. Perl is arguably the world's expert in harmful algal blooms, and getting his and his team's attention to the Delta will significantly raise the bar in our level of understanding of harmful algal blooms. This project will study how plankton contributing to harmful algal blooms affect both water and air quality. Key outcomes include informing harmful algal bloom human exposure guidelines and mitigation policy to combat human and environmental health impacts. This project addresses Science Action Agenda action areas 1 and 3. Next slide, please. Migratory fish are culturally and ecologically significant in the Delta, but research to date has not sufficiently improved population outcomes and/or been sufficiently synthesized. Further, the management of migratory fish frequently has been guided by a relatively small community of agency managers and the interested public. Next, please. One project we recommend for funding that addresses this is led by Dr. Renee Henry of Trout Unlimited, which is one of 2 of the integrated socio-ecological systems projects we are recommending for funding. This project takes a refreshing and robust approach by involving a diverse set of stakeholders and marrying that input with state-of-the-art modeling tools to co-produce solutions for salmon recovery that are based on both the community and our current knowledge of the species. This project also leverages existing collaboratives, chiefly the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program, so it's not starting from complete scratch. Key outcomes include developing an immediate and collaborative socio-ecological strategy for recovery of Central Valley salmonids. This project addresses Science Action Agenda action areas 2 and 5. Next slide, please. Delta wetlands and food webs are impacted by numerous stressors. Therefore, characterizing barriers to stressor mitigation and benefits of restoration activities is integral for future management efforts and preserving Delta wetlands and food webs. Next, please. One project we recommend for funding that addresses this is led by Dr. John Takakawa of the Sassoon Resource Conservation District. And this is the second integrated socio-ecological systems project we are recommending for funding. This project studies Phragmites, or the common reed, which is an invasive plant that has expanded by over 400% over the last decade in Sassoon Marsh. Phragmites has profound impacts on native species and is a major fire hazard. This work draws on a national team to tackle the problem of getting private landowners and other disparate groups to work together to confront Phragmites. realizing the power of collective action. Comments from our panel reviewers really stood out for this proposal. They were incredibly enthusiastic about the likely positive impacts of this work for this widespread problem. Key outcomes include establishing an integrated pest management approach for Phragmites, highlighting barriers for collective action, and developing communication tools for regional management. This project addresses Science Action Agenda Action Areas 1 and 3. Next slide, please. Finally, sea level rise and subsidence pose significant risks to delta communities and ecosystems. Therefore, evaluating their impacts and trends will help inform current and future mitigation strategies. Next, please. One project we recommend funding that addresses this is led by Dr. Stefan Talke of California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo. The incredible service of this project is memorializing and preserving existing data on historical water level records, data that otherwise would be buried and lost. As we've seen with similar types of projects, we're very likely to learn about locations that are persistently troublesome for flood risk. And these are the areas that will need special attention as we face sea level rise. Key outcomes of this project include improving understanding of tidal, flood, and sea level trends, as well as identifying hotspots of habitat and flood risk sensitivity. This project addresses Science Action Agenda Action Areas 1, 2, and 4. And now I will hand it back to Dr. Laurel Larson to conclude the presentation.
So we are incredibly excited about the whole package of proposals that we're recommending today, and just looking forward to fast forwarding into the future to see the results that will come out of this work. So on whole, we recommend that the council approve this package of 35 contract agreements for a total amount of up to $9,611,012.75 for 16 research projects from the Delta Science Program's 2021 Delta Science Proposal Solicitation. I'm recommending these exceptional research projects after a robust and independent review process. Thank you, council members.
Well, thank you, Dr. Larson, and to the whole team. This is an incredible proposal solicitation package. I just want to point out to folks, as you can see, the importance of the science action agenda in establishing a very clear way of communicating categories of science that are a priority in implementing the Delta Plan. So council members, any questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes,
If I may, I would just love to echo your sentiments that this is a really impressive and incredibly diverse array of projects I'm so grateful we are able to fund, especially at this critical moment in the work that's being done here in California. So just much gratitude to the team, to Dr. Larson, and to all of the applicants for their thoughtful presentations.
Thank you, Christy. Any other council member comments or questions?
I concur with what just was said by Christy. I think a lot of work has been done on the process of selection and everything. I have one quick question though. When we do the process, is that we put out the tight topics and then the respective researchers apply, or they just bring the topics to us?
They bring the
topics.
They bring the topics to us. We do require that the proposals explicitly state how they are relevant to the science action agenda, but the onus is really on the investigators to read that science action agenda and demonstrate that their ideas are directly in line with those actions.
Okay, thank you. A lot of great work. Thank you for doing all this.
Thank you for the comments.
Okay, any other questions from council members?
Chair Tatayan, just a quick comment. Again, just want to reiterate, this is an incredible opportunity. Super excited to see so much interest, and interest that came from all over the country. It's incredible to see. But I also want to highlight and acknowledge the support that we're getting from the Bureau of Reclamation. So to Josh, thank you so much to your agency. It really shows that there is tremendous amount of support for these kinds of projects and moving us forward. So Dr. Larson, thank you. Kudos to you and your efforts and your team.
Great. Yes, thank you, Virginia. Well, council members, this is an action item. Is there a motion on the staff recommendation?
Move approval.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Moranian to approve.
I would second it, Councilmember Natoli. I was just gonna say, is there any public comment on it though?
Okay, second by Councilmember Natoli. Is there any public comment on this item?
There is a public comment. Deidre Desjardins would like to make comment, please.
Okay.
I wanted to thank the Delta Stewardship Council team. I agree this is an amazing proposal, and I just wanted to ask that I don't see the information being provided about the panel review teams, and I wanted to request that that be provided. It needs to be transparent as it is with other federal agencies about who's on the review panels for the grants, and also the interactions with state agencies about what gets funded. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Deirdre. We do have that information, and I believe, if not enumerated in our packet, it's readily available. But I know that we have information on the panel of reviewers, quite extensive review process. Well, if there are no other, are there any other public comments?
There are not.
Okay. Then let's move forward with the vote, starting with Councilmember Damrell.
Aye.
Okay. And Councilmember Madueño.
Aye.
Councilmember Ramian.
Aye.
And Councilmember Donatoli.
Aye.
Councilmember Christy Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Daniel Zingali. You might be muted. Brandon, did we lose the line to Daniel?
Yeah, I'm not seeing him, and I don't see either of the phone numbers I know for him there.
Okay.
So yeah, we might have lost him.
Yeah, it's Councilmember Zingali lives in an area that is one of those areas that does not have reliable broadcast and internet services. So
Here to tie in, there is one phone number on, do you want me to try and see if that is Councilmember Zingali really quick?
Yes.
Hi, if you're on the phone, is this Councilmember Zingali? Oh wait, hold on, one more just joined too. I think that is Councilmember Zingali. 1 second. Hi, Councilmember Zingali, is that you? And if you're on the phone, *6 is to unmute. Well, Chair Time, we'll keep trying to get a hold of him.
Okay. Well, I vote yes on this item, and given that we do have a quorum and a majority, I think we'll just consider this package approved.
Susan, can you hear me?
Oh yes, Daniel, there you are.
Sorry, I think I'm having connectivity issues.
Yes, where did we lose you? We're voting on approving the staff recommendation to approve this package.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
all the way
okay.
up to just a moment ago. Thank you.
Okay, and then so we're ready for your vote on this item.
I'll vote aye. Thank you.
Aye, so it is unanimous. The package is approved, and with that approval, that grants the authority to the executive officer to enter into contractual agreements to fund these projects.
Thank you very much.
This is fantastic. So, and thank you, Dr. Larson, again, and thank you again to all of you. This is a tremendous effort that takes more than a year with many reviewers and a lot of collaboration. So congratulations. On to agenda item 9, consideration and possible approval of the Delta Adapts Vulnerability Assessment and California Environmental Quality Act exemption. Jessica Pearson, lead us
Thank
on.
you, Chair Tatayan. After 3 years of hard work and effort between the council, its staff, stakeholders, community-based organizations, and the public, I'm excited for the council to consider approval of the Delta Adapts Vulnerability Assessment. This is the first ever climate change vulnerability assessment for the Delta. Today, staff will give an overview of the feedback received on the draft vulnerability assessment during the public comment period and discuss how that input affected the final product. Staff will also outline findings that the vulnerability assessment is exempt from CEQA before requesting your approval of the document. With that, I'd like to invite up Harriet Ross, Assistant Planning Director, and I'd like to also thank her for her leadership on this effort. She's been tireless, particularly in meeting with folks and giving multiple presentations, even throughout the pandemic on our work. And I'm grateful for her efforts there. Harriet?
Thank you, Jessica. Whoa, my whole, sorry, my whole screen went, okay, there we go. Good morning, Chair Tatayan, members of the council. Again, I'm Harriet Ross, Assistant Planning Director. I'm very pleased to be presenting to you the final vulnerability assessment today. As Jessica mentioned, this is a major milestone. This body of work represents over 3 years of effort between us at the council and the numerous stakeholders. So today I'll be providing an overview of the comments received on the vulnerability assessment and the attachments. Then the council will have the opportunity to provide any final input and ask questions, and we'll then open it up for public comment. And then at the end, we'll be asking the council to take action on the final vulnerability assessment. And then if we can go ahead and jump 2 slides, please. Yeah, there we go. So just a quick preview at the end of this agenda item, we recommend that the council take action to adopt the proposed resolution to find that the vulnerability assessment is exempt from CEQA, approve the vulnerability assessment with attachments itself, as well as directing the executive officer to take steps and actions as appropriate to affect the intent of the resolution. Next slide, please. So as you know, the vulnerability assessment was out for a 60-day public comment period that ended on March 16th. We received 19 comment letters, and those letters were from individuals, state, regional, and local agencies, flood control agencies and reclamation districts, community-based organizations and nonprofit groups, as well as private entities. Next slide, please. Overall, there were a lot of positive comments on Delta Adapts and recognition that it's obviously a large multi-year effort and that it represents a significant step towards addressing climate change in the Delta. Many stakeholders expressed appreciation to be involved in the process, and it's obvious stakeholders want to continue engaging on Delta Adapts, which is great with our next phase of the project and adaptation. We did receive a number of comments and incorporated many revisions into the vulnerability assessment and the technical analyses. However, we aren't recommending that any of the models be rerun for a number of reasons. First, we don't think it, for a variety of reasons, and those include we don't anticipate a significant change in the results. There are some instances where there are no alternative data or models available. Some revisions would require speculative assumptions, and a lot of the comments on rerunning the model really would be addressed in adaptation more appropriately. So in the next few slides, I'm going to give an overview of some of the comments we received and how we address them. And our responses to the comments can be largely categorized in three following ways. We either have addressed the comment by adding new information or clarifying existing language in the vulnerability assessment or the supporting technical analyses, or we're considering it in the next step of Delta Adapts in the adaptation phase, or we did not address the comment because it was outside the scope of work we established in the beginning of the process. So we did receive broad comments ranging from wanting the document to be more accessible and easier to understand. So we did add more visuals and a glossary of technical terms to address some of those comments. And they range to very specific comments as well. So just to give you a flavor of some of the main comments we received regarding flooding. If you recall, we only looked at flooding from overtopping of the levees only. We did receive many comments on how the vulnerability assessment really should have considered other modes of levee failure other than overtopping. And this was, however, a fundamental assumption made in the beginning of the process. We do feel that it is speculative to assume where levee failure could occur within the Delta at this stage of the process. We also received comments wanting us to consider changes in regulatory conditions and levee heights, and that we should assume continuation of historical funding and future levee investments. So we did, again, make this fundamental assumption in the beginning of the project to assume no action for this stage, really how things operate today in terms of regulations and the existing levee heights. And we will look at both changes to both of these things in adaptation. Now for the ecosystem analysis, if you recall, we did consider primary effects of sea level rise, flooding, and changes in air temperature in our analysis. There were comments about considering secondary effects of climate change, including water temperature, food web, and wind. These secondary effects are considered to be outside of the scope of our study. And some of this, especially related to changes in water temperature as a result in climate change, are part of other separate studies that are ongoing at this point. Another comment we received was about considering social and institutional issues for ecosystems. So for example, addressing social science and human interface with potential land use changes from ecosystem restoration activities. And we do, and we will consider this as part of adaptation. We plan on asking the community and stakeholders what they would like to see in terms of balancing land uses for adaptation. Lastly, for ecosystem, another major comment was about considering impacts to a range of species and ecosystem functions. We did analyze different types of habitats in the vulnerability assessment, but commenters wanted us to take it beyond what we studied and to include other impacts to fish and other plants and animal species. This was what we considered outside the scope of our study to go beyond what we did. Next slide, please. So for water supply and drought, we used a set of water supply metrics to determine climate impacts to overall water supply. That includes delta exports, north of delta reservoir storage, and system shortages. And we were requested to use other metrics to analyze water supply and drought, but we just felt that what we did was adequate, and really in order to model anything additional, we would have had to make many more assumptions, and the analysis was just really beyond what we had planned. Are there any questions for me at this point before I keep moving on? Okay, And so for water supply, again, we were requested to provide more analysis of impacts on reduced Delta exports on populations outside of the Delta served by those exports. We did add a discussion on how drought and water shortages could affect vulnerable communities, including communities outside of the Delta. There were also comments about emphasizing potential impacts from sea level rise above 2 feet. And just if you recall, our water supply model only analyzed impacts up to 2 feet because that is what the model is capable of doing. So we did acknowledge that obviously sea level rise will likely go beyond 2 feet, and there are significant potential impacts in the future to water supply. And then lastly, we did also receive comments on wanting more discussion and analysis on water quality itself. Commoners wanted us to analyze impacts to in-delta water quality due to higher temperatures and more droughts with climate change, especially due to harmful algal blooms. Now, this is, again, outside the scope of our study to address water quality within the vulnerability assessment, but this presents an opportunity for us to collaborate with other stakeholders, such as the Water Board, for future work in this realm. Next slide, please. We did receive a number of comments on the equity analysis itself. If you remember, we created a custom social vulnerability index that identifies the most socially vulnerable areas in the Delta to the climate hazards we looked at and studied based on a set of indicators we identified. So there were many of the community-based organizations wanted us to really expand that coverage area of the social vulnerability index to include the entire jurisdictional area that intersects with the Delta. So for example, Stockton, only a portion of Stockton is within our, within the Delta. So we cut off and identified the socially vulnerable areas within the parts of Stockton that are within the Delta itself. And there was a request to expand beyond the legal boundary Delta to include those full jurisdictional boundaries. And we will consider expanding the social vulnerability index in the adaptation phase as an update to the interactive mapping tool that we have online right now. Then there were some, simple fixes, comments about identifying the neighborhoods and the most socially vulnerable block groups by name. Before we had only referred to them by block group identification numbers. So we edited our analysis and added actual neighborhood names so that folks could see clearly and identify with those neighborhoods that we're considering highly socially vulnerable to climate change. Also, we had comments about how we did not adequately assess vulnerability of small rural communities. This is difficult to do because the census block groups that contain rural areas are very large in the Delta, and these small rural communities don't show up in the index as easily because the small population is averaged out across a large block group area. The social vulnerability index that we created does use the smallest scale spatial data that is available to us. So we did add a discussion to the vulnerability assessment that talks about how the exposure of mobile home parks in the Delta is used as a proxy for rural social vulnerability, as mobile home parks are more likely to be populated by socially vulnerable households. So we were able to add that discussion. There were also comments about wanting more detailed analysis to farm workers, students, and other highly vulnerable populations. I think I've mentioned before that we do plan on talking to the farm worker community as part of adaptation. We did add a new section discussing vulnerable populations to drought, including communities that depend on small water systems, farm workers, and low-income ag communities, including out of the Delta areas that use Delta water exports. Students do not come up in a literature review as a vulnerable population, so students are not specifically discussed in our analysis, but we do consider young children. Lastly, we received comments that the vulnerability assessment should acknowledge that Delta water exports serve disadvantaged communities outside the Delta, and that impacts to Delta exports will impact urban disadvantaged communities served by those exports. We did add in a discussion about how urban water agencies that use Delta exports serve communities that include vulnerable populations. And we also acknowledged in the report, we added it in, that drought and other climate change impacts, including reduced Delta water exports, will likely increase the cost of providing water down the line, and that those increased water rates will disproportionately impact low-income ratepayers. Next slide, please. So that was just an overview of the major comments that we received. Obviously, there's much more detail in it. We reflected those changes as much as we could and clarified language in the document itself. And so next, I wanted to go over the CEQA exemptions that are applicable to the vulnerability assessment. So I'll try to simplify this the best I can. The first exemption is for projects that consist of basic data collection and research, and that would not result in a major disturbance to any environmental resource. So since the vulnerability assessment is strictly for information gathering purposes and a study that will lead to an action, which a public agency has not yet approved, adopted, or funded, this exemption is applicable. The second one is a statutory exemption for projects involving only feasibility or planning studies for possible future actions which the council has not yet approved, adopted, or funded. The vulnerability assessment involves evaluating climate change information that may lead to recommendations for possible future planning actions. But again, these actions have not been approved, adopted, or funded at this time. And lastly, we believe the vulnerability assessment qualifies under the common sense exemption. CEQA applies only to projects that have the potential for causing a significant effect on the environment. And the vulnerability assessment is simply just a study of climate change impacts and will not have a significant effect or any physical effect on the environment. Next slide, please. So after the vulnerability assessment, obviously, we are working hard on still preparing the detailed work plan on the adaptation strategy itself. We hope to have wrap that up within the next month or so, and then we plan on beginning our outreach efforts later on this summer. So that concludes my part of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Don.
Yeah, thank you, Harriet, and thanks to the team that worked on this. Just a handful of questions, and appreciated your overview. That was helpful in kind of connecting some of the dots as to how you responded to the comments that we received. I wanted to ask you, in one section of the document, you were going through and talking about the economic value of commercial activities and structures and so forth. And I just noted that in some of the counties, it had NA, is that no information available? And a couple of the charts, it was in the section on the, well, it was actually table 5.9 and 5.10. And I was referencing for Sacramento County, where some counties had the information available and others didn't. Did you have difficulty in getting that information, or it just wasn't available at all, or?
Yes, that I'm just trying to figure out I'm trying to find table 5-9 right now. And was that about economic value, or was it about something?
It was commercial activity and as well as commercial buildings in the Delta. And I just was curious, for Sacramento YOLO, you showed, and then for Alameda it was less than $1 million. But I was just curious as to, I would think that our assessor, both in this county, but in all counties, would have some of that information available to you.
Yeah, good point. I can look into that. I would imagine this information is available, but we do have NA here, so there must be some, I would imagine, something to do with the portion of the county that is within our legal delta that was difficult to calculate, but I will look into that.
Okay, well, I was going to say, I just by way of offering assistance, certainly in Sacramento County, if there was need to do some outreach as you continue to, finalize report, obviously going to go to the next step, the strategy, but to identify that that's a key piece of information. I don't know how key it is, but I just, it occurred to me that should be, if it's available in 3 of the counties, that'll be available in all the counties to some degree to help you with the report. So I just, I wanted to make that comment. If I could assist Harriet, let me know. I would on that.
Definitely, thank you.
Yeah. I did want to ask you then, and I mentioned this to Jessica in my briefing yesterday, on page 4-28 in this, and by the way, the graphics additions were great. They help draw your attention, but they also help, I think, visualize. But on figure 4.7 on page 4-28.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now, but if I recall, that is the ecosystem figure. That's the one with the regional. So we essentially divided up the Delta and Sisseton Marsh into 5 regions. And that map was intended to really illustrate that. But we obviously used a base of that map for other purposes. And it really just identifies other sub-regions of the Delta. So probably should have used a smaller font to identify the sub-regions versus the larger regions. But.
Yeah, I just like when you have comments like East Side South or Deep Delta or Deepest Delta, and then you intermix that with actual locations like the city of Stockton or understood South, Central, and North Delta. I just some way to delineate that, because those really aren't terms that they may be applicable to what you're doing here. So again, I'm not taking exception to that. I just think that when you call out the bypass or cash loop or something like that I don't know that Deepest Delta is you tried to find that in some glossary.
Right.
I understand what it means and what you were trying to do here. So I thought that might be for clarification's sake on that particular figure.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely.
And then if I could just, one other area, and again, how you knitted this together with the assessment and using temperature, sea level rise, heat, and other aspects. But on the section energy and utilities, and this again, maybe a comment more for going forward, but I found the compilation of the information there as related to both the energy infrastructure, but all the infrastructure, transportation and flood management. Obviously the levees are called out. And I think, I can just recall from conversations in the past on the work that the Delta Protection Commission has done, that the cost is borne by a lot of times the reclamation districts and or the state, depending upon who's responsible for the levees and who's participating in their improvements or maintenance. That the infrastructure piece of this is key. It's one, the road infrastructure are lifelines and for movement of people and goods and such. Then the energy infrastructure, which you identified, it was pretty impressive to know that it compiled not only the miles of transmission lines, the towers, the gas wells and such, and a lot of that's public information, but to put it all here. But I wanted to say for looking at the adaptation strategy, I know one of the issues that hasn't been talked about recently, but at the commission over the years been talked about, is that how does, whether it's rail or Caltrans or energy providers that utilize those assets upon which many millions of people in a lot of cases depend, how do they kind of pay their fair share of dealing with the issue? And fair share maybe not the right term, but how do beyond taxes that may be on certain property holdings and so forth, leased properties, how do they participate in the strategy? And I don't know if you're going to, we have a financing component to what comes next, but some look at that I think would be important, because I know that's a discussion that's often been had as to, well, how come they don't pay to help when their infrastructure is protected and or not, or vulnerable by the levees throughout the delta. So I think going forward might be a good point to draw, and maybe you already drawn attention to it. But again, I appreciated the work that went into it, and those were my comments and questions. And thank you for your effort, and look forward to what comes next.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Any other comments or questions from council members?
Madam Chair, I just, this is a remarkable document.
Yes.
I mean,
it is.
It's really amazing. So it's an overview that I guess we survived without it, but my goodness, I would think that this is a essential document for our future planning. That's for damn sure.
Mm-hmm.
That was all I had to say.
Oh, thank you, Judge. Yes, it is an incredible document. Staff, this was a tremendous effort by the whole team. I think this is the first time, it is the first time that a vulnerability assessment for the Delta region has been completed. And it is a very strong foundation to start moving forward on adaptation planning and adaptation strategy development. Any other comments or questions from council members?
Just quickly to concur, Chair Tatian, I'm really proud to be associated with this document and the work behind it.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Yes, so Daniel and I had the opportunity to participate in one of the workshops with some of the community-based organizations, and I have to say that our staff and the leaders from those organizations, they worked closely together. It was really heartening to me to see the community involvement and the listening that our staff did. I, as Daniel, am very proud of this effort. Well, if there are no other questions from the council, this is an action item. And the request is that we adopt resolution 2021-1 to find the vulnerability assessment and its attachments exempt from CEQA and approve the vulnerability assessment itself.
Move the question.
Second. Okay, so Councilmember Damrell moved to approve, and I think I heard my Councilmember Morayan second.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
There is public comment on this item.
Okay.
OSHA Reserve would like to speak.
Okay.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
OSHA Reserve for local agencies of the North Delta. You know, it could be a lack of effort on my part, but I wasn't able to locate a red line version of the plan. So I was curious, you know, with the different comments that had come in, you know, exactly what mods were made, and maybe Harriet might have explained it to me. I apologize if I missed it, but I would be interested to see that. And I think, you know, just from a flood control perspective, I mean, I just want to continue to, I don't know what the best way to address it would have been, but I think that I still do disagree with the characterization that the baseline is no investment in delta levees. That's not what's happening right now. We do have significant investment in delta levees coming from various different sources, including local, state, federal, that are part of the backdrop occurring right now. And I think to assume otherwise is, you know, can lead to some analytical issues. I understand the intent to look at, you know, recommendations for how to adapt at this second stage of the process, but I do think it's a disservice to make an assumption as a baseline that is not in line with what
the investments have been. It may be difficult to characterize because they may vary over from year to year, but there have been significant investments in delta levees, at least since the 80s. And there has been great improvements and great reductions in any kind of partial failures or other types of problems that we've been having. So there's a clear track record that delta levee investments do prevent the negative impacts on the communities, the infrastructure, ecosystem, wildlife, all these other values that the levees protect. So, I look forward to trying to work that out in the recommendations, but I just wanted to mention that I'm, concerned that the baseline hasn't been accurately reflected in this report. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, OSHA, duly noted. Are there any other public comments?
Or not?
Okay. Well, then let's move forward with the vote, starting with Judge Damrell.
Damrell, aye.
And Virginia Madueño.
Madueño, aye.
Maria Maranian.
Maranian, aye.
Don Natoli.
Don Natoli, aye.
Christy Smith.
Smith, aye.
Daniel Zingali.
Zingali, aye. And
Susan Tatayan, aye. Resolution 2021-1 is unanimously adopted, and the vulnerability assessment is approved. Congratulations. Thank you for all your hard work, Harriet and the whole team. This is quite an accomplishment, and I look forward to the adaptation strategy development that will also be quite the effort. And I think you have a good foundation. I think you've done quite a bit of outreach, and I'm assuming it will continue and probably grow. So thank you.
Thank you.
On to agenda item 10, update from the Department of Water Resources on the 2021 emergency drought salinity barrier in the Delta. Jessica Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. Last month, I mentioned that the governor signed an executive order on the drought, actually 2 executive orders, one of which included authorizing the Department of Water Resources to construct a salinity barrier at the False River to address salinity intrusion into the Delta. So with us today are Jacob McQuirk and Lenny Grimaldo from the department to provide an update on the effort to construct this barrier. And I'd like to express my appreciation for them accepting this invitation. I know they're very busy. Lenny Grimaldo is the Assistant Environmental Director at the Department of Water Resources, and Jacob McQuirk is the South Delta Chief of O&M at DWR. Lenny and Jacob.
All right, thank you very much, Jessica, and good morning. There's a lot of screens flipping around here. Okay, excuse me. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the council. I'm Jacob McQuirk with the Department of Water Resources, and I'm going to walk you through our 2021 emergency drought barrier. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over the dry conditions that everybody knows about. We're going to go over the emergency proclamation, the need for the barrier, the expected benefits. We're also going to go over our temporary urgency change petition, our 2021 monitoring plan, as well as our efforts for long-term planning. And we'll leave some time for discussion at the end. Next slide, please. So I think, as everybody knows, we are in a severe drought. I really don't like to see this map of California so red. I don't see any colors other than red and these colors that are indicating just not enough precipitation. So as everyone knows, we did have an emergency proclamation on May 10th. That was relatively limited. And then again, on April 21st, and then again on May 10th. And in the proclamation on May 10th, the state board was to consider modifications to conserve upstream storage, and DWR is to implement measures from the proclamation from 21. And these excuse me, these measures include the installation of an emergency drought barrier. Next slide, please. Okay, and I think everybody has probably seen the 8 station index, and as you can see, the blue line that represents this year, it's unfortunately quite flat, and we just haven't seen the precipitation this spring leading into the summer. As you can see, we're really at looks like the second driest year on record here. It's a very bad year for hydrology, and one thing I would really add that is that this year in particular, we really didn't get the snow melt that we anticipated. And to make things even worse, the snow melt really just soaked into the ground when we did get it. So we just did not see the inflow that we needed into our reservoirs. Next slide, please. So the need for the barrier, let's talk about that and the expected benefits. So in our drought contingency plan, that particular drought contingency plan, it looks at 2 different actions that are going to help us conserve upstream storage. The first action, it is our temporary urgency change petition. So we did file a temporary urgency change petition with the State Water Resources Control Board. That petition was filed to help relax some of the requirements issued in D1641, our water rights decision. Specifically, some of those requirements that are being relaxed are where our salinity compliance point is, and again, also our delta outflow. Another action that is needed to be able to conserve upstream storage so that we might be able to use it later for beneficial uses is the installation of the emergency drought barrier. And this particular barrier, what it does is it allows us to conserve upstream storage and protect beneficial uses in the interior delta. And it allows us to do so and keep control of delta salinity with the release of less fresh water. And so that is really important. And we really need both of these actions before we can actually save any fresh water. And you can see here, I'll take a second to talk about the image you see on the right hand of this side, or excuse me, the right side of your screen. And that particular image, it's a heat map that shows different salinities. And really what you're looking at is you're looking at the flooded Franks Tract Island. And so as you can see, to the left of Franks Tract, that is West Falls River. And West Falls River is a very large channel. It's approximately 800 feet wide, and it's a great conveyance into Franks Tract. And so twice a day, every flood tide, we're getting a push of saltier bay water from the San Joaquin into Franks Tract. And really what we see is the dynamics within Franks Tract. It does a great job of taking that salt that's pushed in on the flood tide and then further propagating it into the interior delta. And so then when we block off Franks Tract, really when we block off West Falls River, really what we're doing is we're changing the plumbing and we're changing the filling into Franks Tract. So specifically what happens is you'll see a lot more filling from Old River rather than from False River. And the filling from Old River is going to have a lot more of our it comes into the San Joaquin River, but really what we're seeing there is you're going to have a lot of McCallamy River water. You're also going to have water that's coming in from Georgiana Slough, as well as the Delta Cross Canal. So by changing that plumbing, really what we're doing is we're preserving the interior delta salinity with less water by changing the plumbing. Next slide, please. Okay, and so a little more on our temporary urgency change petition. The petition, or excuse me, our petition was approved on June 1st. And what that petition does allow us, or the change in our water rights does allow us to do, is it allows us to move our salinity compliance point. It moves it from Emmeton upstream to 3 Mile Slough, as well as what it does is it allows us to drop our total delta outflow from 4,000 to 3,000 CFS. And one thing that I really wanted to mention again is that we really do need both of these actions before we can actually conserve any water. Because if we were to operate the project with only 3,000 CFS delta outflow without the emergency drought barrier, what would happen is we would lose control of salinity in the delta. And so this particular modification to our water right takes us up through August 15th. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have some more information on the temporary urgency change that was approved by the board. Again, it does change our outflow requirement, and as well as changing our salinity compliance point. So really, what that's doing is that, yes, we are preserving the interior delta salinity, but part of what's happening is we are allowing the saltier water to push further up the Sacramento River. So you do see some increased salinity in the Sacramento River moving upstream. But at the same time, we're also seeing protection of the interior delta. There could be questions that are raised about export operations during the time in which the temporary urgency change was approved. And we are limited during that time period to a combined total exports of 1,500 cubic feet per second. And as most probably know, really that's only a very small fraction of the total export capacity of the Jones pumping plant, as well as the State Water Project Banks pumping plant, which combined are around 15,000 cubic feet per second. And when we're implementing transfers during this time, we will meet the requirements set forth in D1641. Next slide, please. So a little bit on our construction. This particular project was put in place extremely quickly. We realized, I believe it was, the first week in May, that we needed to take action and we needed to move forward with both the TUCP as well as the emergency drought barrier. We actually were able to get all environmental permits in place. We did, through the governor's emergency proclamation, we did have CEQA exempted, as well as a consistency determination for the Delta plan exempted as well. But I would add, so we were able to secure all of our environmental permits by June 2nd, and we actually did start work on the barrier the evening of June 2nd. And just to real quickly list out a few of the permits that we were able to get so quickly, we did secure our Clean Water Act, Section 404 emergency authorization through a regional general permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We also secured a 401 water quality certification through the State Water Resources Control Board. We secured a incidental take plant, if I could speak, an incidental take permit through California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as a stream bed alteration agreement through California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we began work on June 2nd in the evening. And on June 18th, we actually were able to have a thin line of rock across this channel. And I really would like to say this is quite a monumental feat to be able to construct this barrier so quickly. At that particular location, the channel is around 800 feet wide. It's over 30 feet deep. And the barrier itself is around 120 feet at the base. And so we were functionally complete on the barrier yesterday. Today, we are actually out on site. We're completing just a few little last minute items, and our contractor will be fully demobilized and off the site tomorrow. One little note that I'll add as well is that the way in which we structured the next slide as well, the way in which we structured the construction contract for this particular project is we allowed up to 30 days to construct the barrier, but we also provided the opportunity to incur an $80,000 per day bonus up to $800,000 for early completion of the project. And so every day does count. And so it isn't until we have both the temporary urgency change petition as well as the emergency drought barrier in place that we can actually conserve any water in our upstream reservoirs. So the contractor was able to complete the project 10 days ahead of schedule, and they'll be entitled to the full bonus for their work. And so, and I'll add, just for everybody's awareness, the contractor that did complete the job was Quorum. And one thing that we did a little bit differently than in 2015 is we were able to utilize multiple sources of rock in that contract, and that really helped with the competitive bidding process. And so we were able to get a good number of competitive bids, which really ended up saving us quite a bit of money. And so, excuse me, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our monitoring plans. So we have a monitoring plan that is associated with the temporary urgency change petition or change, as well as with the emergency drought barrier. And really there's a lot of overlap between the two plans. And what you can see here is on the right is you'll see these are some of our existing water quality monitoring stations and a couple proposed temporary stations. Next slide, please. Okay. And one thing I want, and so as you can see here, we've got in the middle, there's our drought barrier. And so really, we are doing a lot more extensive monitoring. And this monitoring includes a lot of biological monitoring. And we are working closely with IEP on this. And so really this looks at some of our existing zooplankton sampling locations. And so there's going to be a really good integration between what we're doing on the temporary urgency change petition, what we're doing in the Integrate IEP, as well as the monitoring that we're conducting for the emergency drought barrier. Next slide, please. And we are also doing fish sampling as well. And so this is a graphic that shows some of the extensive fish sampling that we're doing in conjunction with the temporary urgency change as well as the drought barrier. I will add, you won't see it on this particular figure, but we are also conducting a predatory fish monitoring study at the barrier itself. And so we're looking at any changes associated with predatory fish behavior, both before, during, and after construction of the barrier. Next slide, please. And I guess I'm moving through these slides quite quickly, but I'd like to add that something that's really, really important to me is, I didn't really mention earlier, but we were already in process working towards long-term permits to allow us to install the emergency drought barrier across False River beginning in 2022. And so we'd already made some real extensive progress on that. We completed our tribal consultation, and we were getting ready to circulate our CEQA document when we realized that we just weren't going to make it to 2022 without taking these emergency actions. And so really what happened was we ended up moving forward with the emergency action, but I really wanted to emphasize that we are not dropping our planning and permitting efforts associated with future drought barrier. So really what we're trying to do here is we do plan to release a CEQA document this summer and really to allow for a lot more public participation in the planning. And our goal here is to be able to construct the drought barrier again across False River up to 2 times during a 10-year period. So our permits would cover us from as soon as next year, 2022, all the way to 2031. And under this particular process, we're not utilizing any sort of an exemption. We are going to go ahead and get all of our standard individual permits. And we will be working also with the Delta Stewardship Council on our Delta Plan consistency determination. Another little thing that I didn't mention is we are also extensively coordinating, not just with IEP, but also with USGS and the State Water Resources Control Board. And so the state board, they had already started a study with USGS looking at the depth variation in salinity field out in the Sacramento River. And they had indicated that the way in which, we're going to move the salinity field, it was going to impact their study. So we're going ahead and we're supplementing that study through an existing USGS contract that we have. And let's see. And so again, the soonest that we would install the emergency drought barrier, or excuse me, not the emergency drought barrier, just the drought barrier would be next year. And currently we did start installation of the barrier in June this year, but we would be looking in the future to install it as early as April. And one thing I didn't really add that is an important thing to note is through our TUCP and our emergency drought barrier, we cannot improve the salinity in the interior delta. Really all we can do is protect the salinity that we have and slow down any sort of saltwater intrusion. And so that's the reason why it's important to be able to install it as early as we can, but we're also considering resource impacts as well as fisheries concerns and trying to find that balance point where we're able to install it as early as we can, but also minimizing our impacts to resources. Next slide, please. And here I've just got some photos on the drought barrier construction. I'll add a little bit. It was actually a very interesting construction project. It was quite exciting. And as you can see here in this slide, we've got a very large derrick barge. It's the DB Oakland. Its home is in the Bay Area. I think that particular derrick barge has around a 10-yard bucket. And that particular barge was making the initial placements, but unfortunately, it broke down and it went offline about halfway through the project. Kiewit was also using excavators to make placement, and you can see in the slide the photo to the right, you'll see an excavator there placing rock. And so what Kiewit ended up doing is they ended up really supplementing their placement with additional excavators, and they were able to really get good placement of the material and get the barrier installed quite quickly. Another thing that I probably failed to mention is in this particular case, our rock came from the Department of Water Resources Division of Flood Management Emergency Rock Storage Facility in Stockton. So what we were able to do when we issued our contract is we were able to have both our Rio Vista storage facility as well as our Stockton facility as options of where the rock could be taken from to place in False River. And it really helped us get a good competitive bid. And the contractor ended up taking rock from Stockton, pushing it via barge to False River and placing it. Next slide, please. And really, that's all. That's really all I have. Again, we in these really dry times, we did have to take emergency measures, relatively drastic measures, to get this barrier constructed just as soon as possible, so that we could save water in our upstream reservoirs to protect beneficial uses later, as well as to protect beneficial uses within the interior delta. I would add that these two particular actions are quite important for protecting the beneficial uses within the delta. Specifically, there are major benefits to agricultural interests that rely on the delta for irrigation. There's also benefits to communities that receive their drinking water from Contra Costa Water District. They're also a beneficiary, as well as preserving our ability to maintain that fresh corridor and maintain some level of both CVP and SWP exports. And so really that's all I have. Thank you everybody for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions folks may have.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Jacob, for taking the time to walk us through that. Looks like we have some questions. Don, and then Maria, and then Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jacob, for your presentation. I had a couple of questions. One goes back to the barrier placement in 2015, obviously this being the second time, and certainly your discussion about the drought obviously is concerning to all of us. So as a part of the follow on to the barrier placement in 2015, and I know the Stewardship Council participated, there was analysis done of any of the lasting or long-term impacts, and certainly you noted some of the immediate benefits to those that rely on water from the Delta in particular. But one of the things that stood out for me was that the invasive weeds that took hold in Frank's Tract as a result of, and I guess we had through 2018, so I don't know if that was still the status as of this moment or last year. But I guess my question is, so what has the department undertaken if this is going to be, and you're now seeking with a new permit to actually be able to do this 2 times in 10 years, which would be 4 times in 15 years, God help us. But so how are you taking on this issue though, and what sort of efforts being put forth? Because again, as you mentioned, water usage, recreational usage in the Delta, certainly access by boat is very important, and invasive weeds are prevalent in areas throughout the Delta. But if this feeds that activity and now taking root in in Frank's Tract, what's my question is, so what's being done to combat that?
Thank you, council member. So we are working quite closely with the Division of our Parks Division of Boating and Waterways, Aquatic Invasive Species Unit. And so I have been coordinating with their program manager, Eddie Hard, on that front, and asking specifically kind of what the need is for aquatic weed treatment. And kind of from what I've heard is that they don't have a need for additional treatment. The weed issue within Frank's Tract is a little bit more complicated. I mean, I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert on it, but what was indicated is it's a combination of both native and non-native weeds, and it's not as simple as treating it. And so we do see that there were some changes in the distribution of aquatic weeds associated with the barrier. I'm not sure that we're certain that there's a change in the either the density or the total quantity. So really what we're doing is we are working with Boating and Waterways, and if there is a need, we're willing to work with Boating and Waterways to help them with that need. But at this point, we don't have any treatments planned within Frank's Tract or anything like that. And really it's limited to coordination with Boating and Waterways and working with them if we need to do any treatments or removals.
So Jacob, is funding made available then as a follow-on? Obviously there was a study done following 2015 barrier installation, and I recognize the cooperation obviously between the state agencies and other locals, but sometimes funding gets to be the challenge. And just as you talked about the incentive to get this barrier in, significant, and the work was accomplished, and no small engineering feat. Seemed to me if there are long-term impacts, either in part or otherwise attributable to this, and for what benefits come by way of it, there should be some continued sustained effort then to see to it that any lasting impacts, or at least it needs to be addressed in the CEQA document. I trust it may be.
Absolutely.
And funding needs to follow with that. So,
yeah. Did you want to say something? Was somebody else going to speak? Okay, no, I'll go ahead and answer that. And so we haven't made any funding commitment at this point in time, but we also haven't ruled out the need to supplement Boating and Waterways funding if it does show that construction of the drought barrier is increasing the aquatic weed problem that we know we have in Frank's Tract. So we're definitely not ruling out providing funding to Boating and Waterways, but as of right now, we have not.
Well, I thought that was a finding. It may be more complicated than what was in the summary document that was issued, but I believe it said that was it allowed invasive to colonize in Frank's Tract. I mean, I thought that was a finding. So is it still in question then?
I will be happy to evaluate that and report back, but my understanding is it wasn't quite that certain. And Lenny, did you have anything you wanted to add on aquatic weed in Frank's Tract?
I'll just add a couple sentences. So there are currently aquatic weeds in Frank's Tract year round in all years. But the research that was funded by the Delta Science Program in 2015 did indicate that the weeds did increase with the barrier installed. And we're aware of that research. Right now, some of our environmental analysis have been focused on the propagation of those effects on the endangered species beyond the footprint of Frank's Tract. So during the summer months, we don't see a lot of native endangered species in the area around Frank's Tract. The water temperatures are a little warm, but we recognize the recreational and boating impacts of any weeds that would be increased because of the barrier. And we recently met with the Delta Science Program, and they communicated perhaps some research needs that we should be aware of, and mainly it's the SAV piece. And we're committed to working with the science program to maybe come together a bit more frequently, do the analyses. We have 2 hyperspectral flyovers to look at the effects of the barrier this year. So we'll get a sense, once again, if the weeds are increasing, and then convene with the science program about potential research questions that we can answer from that monitoring.
Okay, I appreciate that. If I could just very quickly, one other question I wanted to just jump to. This barrier was installed, but there was other barriers that were talked about in 2015 that were not. Is there current conversation? Because again, good deal of contention around those that would be further north in the Delta. And the second piece of that question is that in seeking your long-term permits, and it was plural in your slide, are you looking to permit other locations or only this location for the 2 and 10? And then you would do subsequent action if you consider other barriers in the Delta. So one is what else is being considered, and is the department working on something currently for this year? And secondly, what is your coverage in your permit application?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, thank you. I can answer that. So for our 2 and 10 permit that we are working on, it is just for West Falls River. It does not include any additional barriers. You are absolutely correct. In the previous severe drought, we did look at the possibility of installing 2 additional barriers. These barriers would be at Sutter and Steamboat Slough on the Sacramento River. And what they would do is they would keep water in the Sacramento River, so you get more water in the Sacramento River as well as into the Delta Cross Canal and Georgiana Slough. At this point in time, we are not seeking permits for those actions, but we are starting back again on coordination, engineering, planning, and trying to make plans in case we do need to go that route. At this point, we do not have plans to come forward with permit documents or a CEQA document for Sutter or Steamboat Slough.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam.
Certainly, Maria.
Yes, I have a few, 2 questions, maybe 3. I understand, the drought and all that, and the emergency nature of this. And however, I wanted to ask from you if there was lessons learned on the negative impacts last time that was shared and done differently. That's my question number 1. And is there an assessment, because of that, is there an assessment of any possible negative impact?
Okay, so the question was lessons learned from the last drought. And so we did,
From the last time that you built it, and what happened and how did it impact? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so we definitely have had some lessons learned. We did prepare a report on that kind of shows what the issues were, what the impacts were, as well as what we may have been able to do differently. On a physical side, we were able to learn that we didn't need to install the steel sheet piles to protect the levees, because we were able to refine our geotechnical design, and now we're able to place rock from bank to bank. We also learned that on the science side, we really needed to get out there earlier and be able to get some of this pre-data, as well as trying to help us determine the different effects of drought versus drought barrier. And so we're really doing a good job on that, coordinating closely with IEP, and we have a much more robust monitoring plan. And that particular monitoring plan, it was in a draft format. We did provide that to all the permitting agencies, and in some cases, I know specifically from the state board, it was actually a requirement of our 401 certification. So they said, go ahead and implement that much more extensive and robust monitoring plan. And I know there's a lot more lessons. And like I said, I do have a report on that. I'd be more than happy to share. But that's all I have on really on the top of my mind.
The report. It will be good.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that.
Also, because from that also we will learn about possible negative impacts that we still might experience because of this.
Exactly.
Although, okay, yeah, if you could share, that would be great. And then the rocks that you said that were moved and that were a part of it came from the flood control and all that. That means that I'm just worried that now we have.
I get your question. You're worried that the rocks won't be there when we need them for a flood? Okay, let me address that one. That's a very important question. So we are utilizing rocks from that Stockton facility, but we would have the rock back to Stockton by November 30th. And there will be some lost rock. I think we're estimating around 10,000 tons, and that particular rock we would replace with new rock as well. So yeah, we definitely are going to leave that hole. And then the other thing is we have, I mean, everybody can get on Google Earth and zoom into Rio Vista and zoom out, and you'll see that the department has a very, very large stockpile of emergency rock. I don't know how many tons it is, but I can tell you it's hundreds of thousands of tons. It's quite a bit of material.
Yeah, as long as it's replaced.
Yeah, so we are definitely being mindful of that. And I would add that we're even doing a little more than that. And so this was a great opportunity to really test out our rock facility in Stockton that flood management put in, and it worked quite well. We are making a few little upgrades, and we're gonna do a little bit of work on the loaders and the shakers so that it's even better than it was when we got there.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your response. Yeah.
No problem.
I'm just going to add a couple sentences about the lessons learned. So there's a process piece to this, and Jacob mentioned that the IEP, which is the Interagency Ecological Program, and I want to be mindful of time, so I'll be quick here. So there's a drought synthesis team that was formed back then. That group has been meeting regularly, and we're using that team per the orders request that we coordinate with the IEP on our drought and monitoring synthesis. And what we're learning is that we have a lot of monitoring in place. We've added monitoring stations. We know the analyses that we need to conduct. But more salient is that we develop predictions based on what we saw in 2015. So that's how we're approaching the analysis this year, is using those predictions as the framework for how we would do the analyses. And one final thing is that our monitoring plan that we're working closely with Reclamation on with is posted on DWR's ITP website. So folks can find that monitoring plan on our website.
Okay, thank you.
Virginia.
Thank you, Chair. Jacob, a couple of questions, and I'm one of the new kids on the block, so and I apologize if my questions are out of line, but totally given the emergency drought declaration given by the governor, my question is, how closely do you work, or are you working with our staff here at the council? And I guess it's more aligned with, I understand that there was a study. I think it was a very significant study with regards to the impacts of a barrier being put in place. And so my question is, how closely do you work? And again, given the severity of the situation that we find ourselves in, and I understand that there's not a whole lot of time for planning, but how well are you coordinating with our our staff. That's question one. Two, a lot of emphasis was placed on rocks and, you know, us being able to use some of this material. What does the future look like, given that, you know, we do find ourselves in this predicament that I think droughts are going to be a part of our, you know, future? What changes are you incorporating for perhaps a more permanent feature? And would it entail a different type of material aside from rock? Oh, and then the last one, sorry, third one. And I'm not familiar with this location of where the barrier is being put in place, but how closely are you working with landowners out there?
Well, I think I can get through those three questions, and just if I miss a few, just please remind me. So first, the question was, how are we coordinating with Delta Stewardship Council staff? And so I'll say we haven't been coordinating as much as we should have, but we really are ramping up our coordination. We did meet earlier. We're going to have extensive coordination on the Delta Plan consistency determination. So we will be working on that, and we will be also working on the science side to make sure that we're getting any sort of advice and collaboration also with the Stewardship Council. So I'll say that, you know, it's kind of been a little bit of a blur. We may not have done quite as good of a job yet in coordinating with the Delta Stewardship Council staff, but we will do so, and we will be ramping that up. Then you had a question. I remember the third one was on the permanency and the material. What was the second one again? Sorry.
Oh, how you were working with the landowners in that area.
Oh, great. Yeah. So this particular one, we actually were in relatively good shape. I actually was the project manager also in 2015 for the installation. So we were able to secure long-term lease agreements and permanent rights on both Bradford and Jersey. So we do have a lease agreement with Iron House Sanitary District that enables us to, I think it was a 10-year lease, so we're still covered by that. And then on the Bradford side, we actually do have a permanent right through an agreement that we signed in 2015. So that's what we're doing there. I'll add that you know, one of the lessons learned and something that happened in 2015 is we did have issues associated with the Delta Ferry. And so we had an issue with some unanticipated velocities within Fisherman's Cut, and that particular ferry was got grounded, it got damaged, there was all sorts of problems. We had agreed in our permanent right on Bradford Island that we would have absolutely no impact to the ferry, and we impacted the ferry. So what we did to mitigate for that impact is we went ahead and we fully upgraded that. I think it's the Victory 2 ferry. We put new Tier 4 clean diesel engines in there, and we did all sorts of modifications and upgrades to the tune of almost approximately $1 million. So that ferry, the Delta ferry, it may look old, but it is not old. It has all new workings on the inside. And then you asked, the last question was really on permanent solutions as well as materials. And so really, we specifically are not looking as much at the permanent solutions right now, but I would point the council towards some planning efforts that California Department of Fish and Wildlife has led. And I am a member of that planning group and on that steering committee, and that is the Frank's Track Futures project. And so that's a project that could have some benefits. It's not a near-term project. It's many years out if it does get constructed. But one of the things that we've learned through hydrodynamic modeling is you could receive similar benefits with much, much smaller channel closures. You'd still need to place some rock, but it'd be a whole lot less. One other thing that's really in the back of our minds, although we haven't really move forward on it and things are kind of a blur, and that is the idea of whether or not we could retain some rock in the channel if it's going to be a long-term drought. So that is something we hope to look at if possible, if time permits. I did want to look at that, and we have been thinking also about a monitoring plan associated with that and working with USGS to look at, you know, the velocities and other issues associated with that. But I can't commit that we're going to be able to complete that this time around, but it is something that we'd like to look at. But at this point, yeah, we aren't looking at like sheet piles or other materials. We did do back when we worked with the Army Corps in 2015. We did conduct a 404B1 analysis that looked at different alternatives to rock, and really it pointed back to the rock as being the best solution. One thing that's really great about rock is it's adaptable, it's available, and you can place it quickly. Whereas like sheet piles, we did place quite a bit of sheet pile back in 15, and that's part of the reason that we didn't have to do it this year. So we left those levees much better. We added seepage berm and we ran sheet pile through the center line of those levees to make sure that they're very solid for the barrier founding.
Great, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Are there any other questions from council members?
Well, I thank everybody for their time. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you. Thank you for an excellent briefing. That it's incredible that the barriers were constructed so quickly. I don't think I've ever seen it happen that quickly before.
Well, yeah, I haven't either, and it was a lot of lost sleep. But hey, the barrier is in place, and we are incurring the benefits, which are very important. So I'll make sure to get that report out. I'll send it over to Jeff Henderson, our efficacy report, so that can be shared.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
There is. We have a public comment from Deidre Desjardins.
Okay.
Hello, thank you again, council members, and thanks to DWR for their crisis management. It is exceptional. I am concerned as somebody who looked at the runoff forecasting that DWR used this year, that it's based on a historic hydrology. So it's based on the last 50 years of runoff. And they find analog years in the 50-year historic record. And I identified back in the water fix hearing that this was going to be a problem with climate change. It was used to predict what runoff would be this year, and it was just way, way off. We've written the water board and asked them to require a report on those models and to look at the reasons that they were so off, because DWR in February and March was projecting that they would meet the water quality control plan standards. And the issue is that it affected water management and more water was let out of the reservoirs than would have otherwise been let out. And some of it is that the climate is also shifting, and we are in a unprecedentedly dry year, but that model is just not working anymore. So I just wanted you to be aware of it. The other thing is that in the 2013 to 2016 drought, when these barriers were done and there was waivers of water quality requirements, it looks like it did effectively drive the Delta smelt to the brink of extinction, and it doesn't look like they're going to recover at this point. So this is an extinction plan, and it's not something we should go to if we can at all avoid it. And there are, I looked at the reservoir modeling. So there are ways to manage reservoirs for risk, for minimizing risk of not meeting the water quality control plan requirements. And it would be a very different kind of reservoir management than is being done currently. And we did get in the water resilience portfolio a recommendation to support the development of a drought operations strategy for the state water project and Central Valley project to meet water board required flow and water quality criteria and respond to fish and wildlife needs during extended drought conditions. And I've advocated for this for years. and unfortunately it was opposed by the state water contractors, and so it hasn't been done. But I will say that this is a need that DWR's own chief modeler, Francis Chung, identified in 2010 when he was looking at modeling for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, that reservoirs were drawn down to dead pool where you couldn't even get water out of the reservoirs, many more times than in under climate change than in the historic record. And he recommended development of a different reservoir operation strategy. And it just, those kind of strategies, analysis just hasn't been done. And that's one of the reasons why I feel that the water supply reliability review by the Delta Independent Science Board is very important. In 2018, in the workshop, I said that there's a difference between water supply reliability for meeting the water quality control plan requirements and water supply reliability for Southern California. And there is a strategy whereby you just opportunistically take water and put it in, export it south and put it in Diamond Valley Reservoir. And that's what we've done this year. And Southern California is in excellent shape, but Northern California and the fish are in terrible, terrible shape. So there are some longer term management needs. And it's one of the reasons why I've been advocating so strongly for the Independent Science Board, because there are some members who have that expertise and they're willing to take a critical look at it. For some reason, I don't think there is some loss in delivery capability if there's a more conservative reservoir management strategy, but I don't think it's huge. And I think it would benefit everybody. It would certainly benefit Sacramento Valley and the Delta, but I think it would also benefit the permanent crop growers. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Deirdre. Beck, are there any other public comments?
Yes, I also have Gilbert Cosio.
Thank you, Chair Tataya and members of the council. Great presentation, guys. That was very good. I want to just address Councilmember Natoli's questions about the North Delta. Before the TUCP was submitted, Michael George, the water master in the Delta, actually convened sort of an ad hoc committee made up of representatives of the North, Central, and South Delta water agencies and other stakeholders to start talking about what are we going to do, in response to a drought. And so we started talking about barriers, and certainly when the False River barrier came up, we were all in agreement that that was good for the bulk of the Delta because, like Jacob explained, you get water trapped in Frank's Tract, everybody is hurting. And so the key is keeping it from getting in there. If it does get in there, then you need a pretty good flushing flow. Pretty much you need to count on a flood year the next year to get that water out, or it'll be stuck for a while. So we didn't have any problems with the False River barrier going in, except for some of the concerns that have already been discussed about native plants and exotic plants, that sort of thing. But our hope with getting this group together is to put a voice, one Delta voice together, so that when we do start talking about the long-term barriers, such as the North, then as Jacob mentioned, they're going to have some communication, and we missed that in 2015. We're kind of given the plan late, so we're hopeful that we can actually get more involved earlier. And you can thank, like I said, the water master for kind of thinking ahead to getting us together. So, Councilman Tolley, hopefully that'll satisfy that we are talking to them. So, thanks.
That helps, yeah. Thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Gilbert. I don't have any- Go ahead.
I was going to say there's no more public comment. Go ahead.
Nothing to add other than that we will be working with people in the North Delta.
Chair Tatian, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you so much, Jacob and Lenny, for being with us today to give this presentation. Well, with that, we'll move on unless there are other council questions or comments. Okay. Well, hearing none, then we'll move on to agenda item 11, preparation for the next council meeting. Next council meeting will take place July 15 and 16, again, virtually via Zoom. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Hope you have a great weekend, end of week. Happy Friday for tomorrow, and stay cool. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Travis. Great meeting.